All right, everyone. It is great to see everyone here this evening. My name is David Glasner. I'm the superintendent, and we are thrilled to all be in this space together to have a conversation about detracking. Before we get started, we did kind of want to get a sense of who is in the room here. So just by a show of hands, if you currently have a student in Shaker Heights School District, can you raise your hand? All right, thank you. If you are an alumni of Shaker Heights School District, can you raise your hand? All right. If you are a teacher or staff member in Shaker Heights, can you raise your hand? All right. If you, I don't know if there will be anybody in here who lives in a community not in Shaker Heights, can you raise your hand? All right. Last question, if you either used to have students in Shaker Heights or don't have students yet in the Shaker Heights School District, can you raise your hand? All right. Thank you. Much appreciated. So we are here to have a conversation about detracking, to ask questions, to listen to answers, and to hear different people's perspectives on detracking. This is meant to be a discussion, a conversation, and we're very much looking forward to it this evening. In a minute, I will introduce our esteemed panelists. I did want to just set the stage by defining what detracking is, and maybe specifically what detracking looks like in Shaker Heights. Detracking is the idea that all classes should be inclusive and representative of our entire community, and that classes should be heterogeneous in nature and in composition of the student body. The example that we most often talk about in Shaker Heights usually has to do with math. So it used to be in Shaker Heights that starting in 5th grade, if not earlier, students were divided into different tracks. The advanced track of students would take enriched math, and the non-advanced track of students would take grade level or core math. As students advanced up the grade levels, that would typically culminate in middle school with advanced students or students in the advanced track taking algebra, and students not in the advanced track taking algebra usually in high school. We switched a few years ago when we detracked. We switched a few years ago to ensure that all students now take algebra by 8th grade. In Shaker Heights, as I think many of you are aware, we're a very diverse community. What we saw in our tracks was that our tracks were largely, if not entirely, segregated by race. And that was something that was generally very concerning to us. And so when we detracked, we wanted to ensure that all of our classes are inclusive, and also that we are providing an excellent, rigorous, enriching, and supportive learning environment for all of our students. So that's what it looks like in Shaker Heights, and the reason I keep mentioning that is because I know we do have panelists from other districts or organizations here, and it may look a little different in different areas, so we could talk about that a little more this evening. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with my left, and I'll go down the line. We have Dr. Amanda Yurick. Dr. Yurick has been an educator for more than 20 years and is currently an associate professor at Cleveland State University in special education and applied behavior analysis. She teaches courses on evidence-based intervention and assessment for both academic and behavioral needs. To her left, Dr. Marcus Campbell. Dr. Campbell has served as the superintendent of Evanston Township High School District 202 in Evanston, Illinois since July of 2022. He has been a part of that district for more than 20 years, where he previously served as the assistant superintendent/principal at Evanston Township High School. He's also the associate principal, the director for student supports and racial equity, and an English teacher for 10 years. I think many of you know the person to Dr. Campbell's left. Dr. John Moore is the Shaker Heights City School District's Director of Curriculum and Instruction. He has previously served as the district's International Baccalaureate Coordinator, the IB Diploma Program Coordinator, and IB Middle Years Program Coordinator, and he joined the district in 2008 as a biology teacher. To Dr. Moore's left, we have Belise Bradley. Belise is a junior at Shaker Heights High School and is enrolled in the College Credit Plus, CCP, program through Cleveland State University. She is active in volleyball and a variety of student organizations, including the Student Group on Race Relations, SCORE, MAC Sister Scholars, and Take Action. And next to Belize is Maddie Moore. Maddie is a junior at Shaker Heights High School also. She enrolled in the district after moving here from Cleveland Heights in 6th grade. Maddie is a member of the Shaker Heights High School swim team and is an IB Diploma Program student. She also serves as a student leader for the Student Group on Race Relations. Last but certainly not least, Ms. Karlee Robinson. Ms. Robinson is currently in her 11th year teaching math at Shaker Heights Middle School and 8th year as the 7th grade math department chair. Ms. Robinson was selected for the Ohio Council of Teachers of Mathematics Linda M. Gojak Middle School Award, and she offers math support to middle school students as an advisor for Rising Stars. You can find this information as well as more information about our panelists in the programs that I see many of you holding. If you didn't get to grab those on your way in, you can certainly grab them on your way out. Before we start, just one note about logistics. I'll start by asking some questions to our panelists, having a discussion with them, and about halfway through, we'll open up the floor for questions from anybody in the audience. We'll bring a microphone up so folks can ask questions. This event is not being live streamed, but it is being recorded, and we will post the recording to our website once it is done so that folks either can rewatch it or can share it with other people who couldn't be here this evening. With that, we'll get started. So for this question, we'll just go down the line. I'd like to ask each of our panelists, really just to start us off by sharing your experience with detracking and your perspective on detracking. Why don't we start with Amanda and just go down the row?
Good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, first, let me say thank you to the district administration and also to all of you folks for welcoming us here tonight. I very much look forward to this conversation, and it's very encouraging to see such an engaged community. So my perspectives and experience with detracking and why we're here this evening. As mentioned in the brief introduction, I am faculty at Cleveland State University, have been for 17 years now. And I'm also engaged with the district through a couple of different initiatives that are included in part of my professional work there with the university. Namely, we provide programming and an after-school and auxiliary educational support for learners of differing levels and abilities. And so my work here with the district has been engaged with providing after-school tutoring support for kids who need additional support in the classroom and additional enrichment opportunities. In talking with district leaders, we have decided to move that into the classroom. So instead of after-school programming, part of the programs that we run together include pushing into math classes in the middle school to provide that additional support with the content that they're learning in their detracked math classes. So I'm excited to be part of this initiative because I see Shaker Heights as really a leader in this role, and they are a leader in this region. So to be part of this initiative is very exciting for me, very encouraging for me, because I think as we talk tonight about detracking, a lot of it is very clear the why we do it. As Dr. Glasner mentioned, looking at the racial segregation in our classes was problematic. But there's an analog to that. As he mentioned, I'm in special education, but special education is not just disability, it's actually gifted education as well. We work on the spectrum of differing abilities, and we meet the learner where they're at in the classroom. And so when we talk about an initiative that detracks, what we're talking about is desegregation by ability level. That's exciting. So keep in mind as we pursue this initiative, this is not about making sure that we are changing the faces that we see in our class, but that we're changing the outcomes that we see for our students. Because when we allow students to access rigorous curriculum with multi-tiered systems of support in place, meaning we have actual evidence-based intervention instruction in the classroom, then we can take students to different levels of academic outcomes not seen before. And that's on students who are lower performing levels academically, but especially students who are higher performing levels academically. So that part of this initiative makes me very excited to be here. I know the why, but I also want to share the how, because the how is where we really see the advancements. So with that, I will pass the mic.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Campbell, and I serve as superintendent at Evanston Township High School, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you today and this evening. I've spent my day in the district having an opportunity to speak with teachers and administrators and department chairs and so many staff members about our experience in Evanston while we detract. I was also joined by my colleague in the corner there, Dr. Pete Bavis, who's our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. And I guess I'll start by saying my experience with detracking started as when I started as a teacher in Evanston, 22 years old, just out of college, and I was teaching regular level courses, which were all black and brown, and teaching honors level courses, which were all white. And I remember approaching the Greek mythology unit, and I was challenged to take my freshmen through Fitzgerald's Odyssey. And I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? I'm going to get my regular students through Fitzgerald's Odyssey, and I didn't think that they couldn't do the work. And then one day I was in our copy center and we're sort of the de facto teacher's lounge, and they're like, are you really going to take those regular kids through Fitzgerald's text? And I said, of course I am. I said, no, you give them this. And it was such a dumbed-down version of the Odyssey. It was almost like a coloring book. And I said I would never insult my students in that way. It's my responsibility as a teacher to get them through this Fitzgerald text. And you fast forward about 7, 8, 9, or 10 years, I was teaching and coordinating AVID as the district director. AVID is a program for students in the academic middle to get them to do more honors and AP level work. And I decided to teach AP Lit and Comp with AVID students, but also with students who were testing perfect on the ACT. Not just one of my students in that class got a 36 on the ACT. 2 or 3 of them got 36s on the ACT multiple times, and they were in that class with AVID students who were in the academic middle. And guess what? When I taught not Fitzgerald's Odyssey, but Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, they all struggled, right? And when I taught Zora Neale Hurston's The Arabs Were Watching God, we had a lot of rich discussion. So I knew in my heart, just intrinsically as a teacher, that you could take students, if you really believed in their aptitude and believed that they could do the work, the instructional pedagogy and the methodology is there to do it. And so we, as a district, we started detracking in 2009, 2010, and we started with freshman humanities, which is an English history block course, and then we detracked our biology course, and then I have to be honest, at that time as a teacher, we started talking about detracking and in content areas that I was like, well, how was that gonna look? When we looked at math and we detracked geometry, and we began to detract biology and our chemistry courses, and guess what? Our teachers said, yeah, this is how we can do that. And so much so that and me professionally, my master's level work is on detracking, my doctoral level work is on detracking, and it has been a wonderful journey in our district to see that when you raise expectations and you believe that students can actually do the work, these students actually rise to the occasion. And so that's been my professional experience, and I must say it has been part of my professional identity, as I mentioned to staff members today, that it is not just important that we give kids an opportunity, but it's important that all kids have an opportunity to access that high-level curriculum.
Thank you.
Similar to Dr. Campbell, my journey with detracking really began when I started here in Shaker as a teacher. I didn't graduate from Shaker, but I got my education here. And in 2008, when I started as a high school biology teacher, I was teaching 2 of our 5 levels of biology, honors, and at the time, what we called general. And I ended up in Shaker because I believed in the vision and the mission that this community presents itself, the commitment to DEI. I moved here, I was all in. And it was after about a year or 2 that I recognized in myself the impact that the system was having on how I saw children, my beliefs about who could do what. And what I started on, it was this journey of recognizing that What we were doing by segregating the kids was actually reinforcing. It was created by, but it was also reinforcing some of these beliefs that really hamper the ability and the excellence of our children. That started me on that path of really, I think, interrogating some of the things that we were doing here. I also saw a great opportunity that when we started to bring in the International Baccalaureate, one of the requirements is that teachers have to collaborate. And that was a recurring theme today, how vital teacher collaboration is to this kind of work. And for the first time, at least in my experience, in that biology class across those 5 levels, we started to have these conversations around what kind of labs are you doing? What kind of learning tasks are you doing? What are you doing to engage these young people? And really with that impetus of IB, we had to find these commonalities of experiences across those 5 levels. And in some ways, I view that as our first foothold in doing some of this work. Flash forward to today as Director of Curriculum Instruction, I view it as my role, my responsibility to outfit, to support, to listen and learn from our teachers who are working every day to bring this grand idea to reality for your children. And I'm also, I will fully admit, there are challenges here. It's hard work, but it's really important, good work. And I view it as my job to make sure that our teachers find success in doing this hard work, and many of them, all of them are. I feel responsible for helping them to do that.
Okay, guess it's my turn. Hello, I'm Belize, and like we've already kind of discussed, I'm a junior here. I've been enrolled in Shaker all of my life, and really the tracking system started when I entered 5th grade. When I came into 5th grade, I was placed into an enriched math class and an enriched language class. And so when I left my homeroom, it would be myself and a group of students. We'd go and get taught by another teacher, while the majority of my classmates, mostly black, stayed in our homeroom class. And I just think that as I've progressed through Shaker now to being a junior, I can name almost every single person that was in that enriched math class and can guarantee you they're in an enriched math class now. And just going through Shaker, it's just been a trend from 5th grade to now. I'm one of 3, I'm one of 4 black kids in enriched classes. And with Shaker's efforts to detrack, it's very vital, very important, but it's kind of switched to where now all the kids who are in the lower track are in our so-called enrichment classes now, and all the kids who are in the higher track are now just in AP. So these trends are still continuing, just in a different way. And tracking is very important to our school system in order to enrich kids in a way where they learn about different cultures and different ways of life every day.
All right, hi, I guess it's my turn. So my name is Maddie. I'm also a junior, like Belize, but unlike her, I came to Shaker in 6th grade. So I came in when everyone had already been in like the tracks or like the enriched classes that started in 5th grade. So I was just in like the core level classes. And you notice very quickly and early on that you'd be together for probably your science and your histories, and then for your English and your math, primarily most of the white kids would go off and they would go to a different class, and we'd be and I'd look around and I'm like, oh, well, it's primarily African Americans in the class, and I'm like, this is just why? Like I came here and I just didn't understand what happens, and then you see that correlate to, it keeps going, and then in 7th grade, and then you stay on that track, and then a big thing about the tracking is once you're on the track, you don't get off. Like you're on that train and you're gonna stay on that train until you graduate. And I think that's a big thing, and then that correlates to primarily the white kids and things like they're going into the IB and the AP tracks because they're over here and they're like, oh, well, like we've been in this like enriched class and stuff, so now we can go that step further. And then all these other kids who are just in the core level classes are getting left behind, and they're like, well, wait, what about us? And so they're then going into like the say like enriched, but it's not as like higher up as like the AP when as it was stated earlier, it's not a level of they can't do it. It's just they've never been told they can do it before. So I think that's a very important thing, and that's why I'm so glad to be able to have this chance to be on this panel and talk about these things, because I just think, like, especially, I think we've done so much work, but there's so much farther to go, and I just think that's so amazing.
Hi, I'm Karlee Robinson. Like Dr. Glasner had mentioned, prior to detracking, students would be placed in one of two classes based on a test that they would take back in 5th grade that would kind of put them on a track that would stick with them all the way through high school. So when I actually first got hired 11 years ago teaching math over at Shaker Middle, we actually had 3 levels of math. So we had advanced, we had honors, and then we had like our core math. And you would know if you walked into a classroom, a math classroom, you would immediately know what level you were in. The advanced class was full of white students. Honors, excuse me, honors classes was predominantly white with a few black students mixed in. And then our college, or we called the college prep at the time, our core math, was predominantly all black. And the students knew. I remember personally hearing students just seeing a white student walk by, oh, they're in the advanced class. They're smart. And that was just solely because they saw a white student. I would have black students in my CP class, my college prep class is what we called it, CP class, and they would say, oh, we're in the dumb class. So when we were told that we were going to be detracking, it was obviously the summer of 21, and as a department, we were, of course, extremely overwhelmed. We were in the middle of, a pandemic, teaching virtually and in person concurrently. We were just like in survival mode as the rest of the world was. But fast forward to last year, and as a 7th grade math department, we definitely start to feel much more comfortable in how we were teaching the curriculum to our wide range of ability levels within our classroom. We started to meet and exceed our school improvement plan goals. So this year, we do have a new textbook that we are implementing, which implementing new curriculum comes with its own challenges on top of detracking, but with my colleagues that I work very closely with the collaboration, I feel like we're really on a good path to having all students succeed in the math classroom.
Thank you, everyone, for giving us a summary of your experiences. Why don't we start with some highlights? We'll come to some of the challenges soon, but maybe Ms. Robinson, if you could start this conversation and folks pick up from there. Maybe can you just share some of the highlights, maybe some of the anecdotes that you've experienced over the past couple of years in this setting? And then I encourage anybody else who wants to jump in to feel free.
Sure, so some highlights. I would say that being able to walk into a classroom and see such a diverse mix of students working together, collaborating together to solve a math problem, being able to look at different perspectives. One student might do a math problem one way, like in a very advanced way, whereas another student might not. They might, do tally marks to figure out what the final answer would be. But watching them being able to compare and explain to each other how they still arrived at the correct answer has definitely been a highlight to see the students doing.
Thanks. Anybody else want to jump in?
Or are we just going down? Here. I'll go. I can jump in. That's great. No, I mean, personally, I think I can't personally say that, because we were still tracked in, when me and Belize were in our elementary school days and going on to that. But I just think having a diverse group, just even in the classroom alone, is just, it's completely different and it's life-changing, because I just think it adds so many different perspectives, and it also, again, like coming to like answers differently and things like that. I just think to have just different learning styles and everybody, and I think it helps some people who might struggle a little more. I think they add in and be like some kids who are a little like higher, maybe better at math. They're like, oh, well, like you can do it. I think the moral support, and it brings everyone, and so then everyone's like leveling up together, and we're all growing at the same.
Yes, I'll jump in. As an outsider, I'll tell you what was very much of a highlight for us, and I'm actually thinking about the data side. The first cohort of kids who went through a freshman detract experience in our school, when they took the ACT, they had the highest ACT score as a cohort in the history of the district. And this is with everybody taking the ACT at that time in the state of Illinois, and they beat those scores beat the kids in the 90s who went to ETHS who were on the college track. And so this is an external evaluation. This is an external measure. And you probably got questions about data and all of that. But that was that, and we were very careful to not say that it was causal, right? Because we had a lot of interventions that were happening in the district at the time. But when we saw that, those scores, not only did white kids do better, but all kids did better. And we were engaging in the detracking efforts to address racial disparities in achievement, right? Shaker Heights and Evanston are almost identical racially, almost identical social, economically. And so we saw our data, what are we going to do? We need to raise expectations. We need to give kids of color access to rigorous courses and all of that. But what we found was that when we raised expectations for all kids, everybody did better, and our the gap, what is used to be referred to as the achievement gap, that went like this, right? And so, and it created a different conversation for us as a district for how do we really continue to disaggregate our data by race and look at outcomes for kids, but that was a tremendous highlight. And so all of the blood and the sweat and the tears that we went through for those kids, we believe actually paid off with that cohort and the subsequent cohorts to follow.
Anybody want to add anything?
I'd like to jump in to tack onto what Dr. Campbell just mentioned. What we know definitively is that the two highest correlates to student outcomes and achievement happen to be the number of actively academically engaged minutes, opportunities to respond to content, but then the second one is content covered. The more content you cover, the more you can have these outcomes that he's talking about. This isn't magic. It's not something that is unknowable. If we have students who we are de facto limiting or preventing from accessing rigorous curriculum, it's a defined impossibility that they will improve outcomes, right? So by accessing the content, you can have outcomes Dr. Campbell is talking about. When you enhance that with systematic instruction, multi-tiered systems of support, you can not only allow students who are maybe feeling in over their head or lower performing, you can allow them to achieve at extraordinarily advanced levels, but you can also take students who were already achieving well and move them even further than before. So to take it back to the why, we know, as Maddie was talking about, the relationships that you can develop with students from different backgrounds that you may not be familiar with. But I really want to put a point on the benefits in desegregating by ability. And that's what we're talking about. And that mirrors and maps onto civil rights legislation in disability and advanced ability, different types of equity in terms of advanced ability. Thanks.
What I'm hearing, Dr. Yurick, say, or at least what I'm connecting with you on, is this idea of expectations. We talk about content covered, and that is vitally important. I think this gives us a new opportunity to have high expectations for each of our children on what content we can cover. Mm-hmm. When we started this detracking initiative, a lot of that expectations game had to change. And in fact, I think COVID contributed to that change. Yes, there is an average from data, but I defy you to find the average child today. These children are coming out of COVID, they're coming out of tracking, and they've had all of these different experiences, all of these wonderful experiences and challenging experiences coming from all different areas. And in a tracked system, when you have a certain amount of content to cover, you can teach to the average, you can teach to the middle, and a decent amount of children will get it. When you are teaching in an integrated environment, The game has changed. And we have to approach instruction in a way that is, in some cases, different than we did before, that's more differentiated, that is more personalized, that has small group work and rotations. It's the kind of instruction I see here. And so as a curriculum instruction guy, when I get to go into that teacher's class and I see young people working in small groups and working with co-teachers, and you don't know who's the gen ed teacher or who's the special ed teacher, but they are collaborating and they're seeing all these different children working together in heterogeneous groups, that's when I know we're on the right track for me. And to nail that point home, when you talk to young people in classes like Ms. Robinson's, and you hear from young black children that I belong here, that gives me the power to look at this work in a way that says, yeah, it's hard, it's difficult, we've got challenges to overcome, but I think we're doing the right work.
Go ahead,
And
and then I have
just
another
to
question.
piggyback off of what Dr. Moore said, I actually had a student, actually two students I can share a highlight on. The one student at the beginning of this year, a black female student of mine said, "Ugh, I hate math. This is the worst class. I've never been good at math." And actually just today, she said, "I actually understand what's going on right now." And she got 100% on her test. And when I told her today, like, hey, you just scored 100% on your quiz, she smiled from ear to ear and was like, I did? She was shocked. But just being able to see that like pure joy and happiness and satisfaction and achievement from students that, 11 years ago, most likely probably would have been put in the college prep low-level math class, and they're sitting in this enriched class right now, honors curriculum, and thriving. She's doing phenomenal. And I had another student just a few days ago, another black female student, who said to me, I'm actually getting this. Like, this is the first time that I'm actually understanding what is going on in math class. So when I hear students make those comments, I say to myself, like, we are on the right track. We are doing the right thing.
So the last couple comments kind of touched on this. I'm kind of curious, Belise and Maddie, can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing, what your friends are saying, and maybe if the adults pick up on this, you can talk a little bit about what your friends and colleagues are saying too. But Belise or Maddie, you want to start?
I can start. There's a lot of mixed comments you hear from your friends and in the hallways because obviously we've been on this track since 5th grade. And so in 5th grade, a teacher, you're either in the advanced class or you're in the regular class, and you're taught to learn a certain way. If you're in advanced, you're taught to learn at a fast, quick pace. You're told you're smart, you're gifted. And this follows you into high school. And then the basic level classes, they're not getting that same encouragement. They're not getting that same push to want to, oh my God, sorry. They're not getting that same push to want to be better. And we get to high school, and now we're not on this track anymore. And for a lot of the people who were on the higher level track, they're like, oh, this is just busy work. They don't feel like they're getting the same enrichment that they had when they were younger. And then on the flip side, you have the people who were in the lower level track, and they're really struggling. And I feel like in some of the classes, there hasn't been that middle ground found yet, and there hasn't been enough support on the lower level side to accommodate the students who are still struggling with this enriched and faster pace. And I think as a person who was on the higher level track and seeing the people on the lower level track struggle, there's just a medium that hasn't been found yet. And I think with extra support and more tutoring or just more available resources, we'll be able to reach that medium, just like Dr. Yurick was saying.
Basically, just picking off back what Belise was saying, I think it's students' perception of this is very mixed. It's a very common topic of, well, Shaker's detracking, like, what is this? A lot of kids are like, well, like, I don't really know, because all they've ever known is, well, there's like the enriched kids, and then there's the rest of us, and like that's just been everything forever. And so just to kind of think and then be like, wait, so like we're not doing that anymore? I think it's a lot of especially a lot of confusion, but a lot of what Belise was saying, it's hard to find that like middle ground, because the kids who are in all those advanced classes, they're like, well, what are we doing right now? This is a cakewalk. Why are we going over stuff I learned 2 years ago? And the kids who are in the core level classes, they're like, why are we moving so quickly? And I think that's just, again, just finding that middle ground is, I think, still obviously a work in progress, but that's just that's the sweet spot right there, is you really just want to have a place where everyone can come together and really, work off that.
And just to add another comment, I mentioned it slightly a little earlier, the conversation has kind of shifted because now everybody's in honors and enriched classes, mixed together, detracked, but you still have AP to worry about. So you walk into an AP class, well, why are there only 2 or 3 black students in those classes? Where did the detracking fall short, where black students still don't feel capable enough to enroll in these harder classes? Where's the support for them to be knowledgeable and know that they are capable of doing that amount of work?
Any adults want to add in here? Well, I'll add a question here. Our students have talked about some of the challenges. Can you talk about some of the challenges either that we've experienced here or you've experienced in your line of work? And what do you think, either what have you done to address those? What are we doing to address those? What do we need to do to address those? You want to start, Dr. Campbell?
Sure, all right, I'll start. We had quite a few challenges at the beginning of our efforts, mainly because we didn't all agree, right? We didn't agree that this would be the best thing to do for children. And we had to have a lot of difficult conversations about it. We had never had an open, honest discussion as a system about race in our district. We were disaggregating our data by race. We had lots of programs going on to get at the achievement gap, which is what we called it back then. But we did not have a common understanding about what we were doing and why we were doing it and what the best method and the pathway was forward. And that took a lot of time, right? It took a lot of time to really discuss what our beliefs were and to really understand when we say all students can learn, what does that really mean and who are we talking about? And those conversations were long, they were difficult, they took time, they had to be courageous. And we ultimately landed in the right place because the superintendent really didn't give us a choice. We had to get community input, support, buy-in. We had to get board input, support, and buy-in. And that took a lot of effort, a lot of discussions, a lot of narrative and storytelling about some of the same things that we've heard tonight. Similar things would happen in Evanston, where you would go to a class and the superintendent at that time as a white man would sit down and the kid told him, oh, you're in the dummy class, right? So the students had internalized the tracks and what that meant for their own academic profiles and their own ability, and it was just something that we knew that we needed to address. And as we begin to do that and say, okay, now we're going to detract, what does the training look like? What does differentiation look like? Because in actuality, when we were tracked, we would think of those classroom settings as more homogeneous, but they were never homogeneous. They were always heterogeneous groupings. It was just what was in the range of the students in front of us were just different, but they were never a homogeneous group. So we had to have those discussions, and they were difficult, and actually training teachers took some time, but we eventually got there. But there are a lot of difficult conversations, and it was really toxic for a while, right? And people that you thought, I was a colleague, I'm superintendent now, but I was a teacher then. People that you thought landed on one side of this conversation really may not have landed on the side of the conversation that you would have hoped them to land on. And so there was a lot of discussions, but now we look back at those at that time and all of the professional development that we did with teachers, and we look fondly on it because the teachers, because of those conversations, had a lot of buy-in. And because we also did forums like this in Evanston, the community then would start to understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. And we got community leaders involved. And that took time, and we were managing the change process, and it wasn't always pretty.
I'd like to jump in if I could, because Dr. Campbell really hit upon some very crucial points to this. I think some of the challenges are that, on the surface we see the benefits to the social aspects of this, right? So desegregating by race, and that makes sense. I mean, most people would say, yes, I'm all for that. In the back of people's minds, the trepidation really comes in is, right, but how are you going to effectively instruct all these different levels of kids and nobody's going to lose out? I just don't buy it, right? That's really what's going on here. And so when Dr. Campbell is bringing up teacher training, this is a piece that is absolutely central. It's not enough to have a good idea. This is a great idea. Let's do it. That's simply not enough. You have to have the brass tacks and knuckles behind it to make it work out. And I'm very, very encouraged at the leadership of this district to say, we are going to commit ourselves to the best models of education. We are going to commit ourselves to training and retraining, undoing some things we thought we knew, trying something different, which best practices are telling us now, and to have teachers come together in synergistic ways to say, hey, we can do this. We have the research, we have the technology. I can tell you point blank, in my college classes, I go on and on and on for hours about this. The technology, the teaching technology is there. And we have teachers down the line here who I was just speaking with her briefly before we came out here this evening, and she said the synergy she feels in her teaching team is what takes this to the next level. So we have the good idea, and we have the social benefits. We have the teaching technologies so that all students can advance to their greatest maximum potential. Advanced placement students and students who struggle. We have that. And we also have gifted teachers who are committed to this process and have the energy to make that a reality. So I think when we can have the patience to say, hey, yeah, this looks challenging, and I'm concerned. I'm deeply concerned. Like, you say it's gonna work out? I don't know. That challenge is really fear. That's a community's fear. That's a student's fear when they walk into a classroom like, I've never been in classes with the kids. I don't know what they're talking about. I've been in classes that I sat down, I'm like, I don't belong here. What are they talking about? That fear doesn't guide the next step. That fear shouldn't guide the future of the outcomes, right? But that fear is what is the most intractable problem, and that's why I really commend this district and Dr. Glasner specifically for having these forums so that we can be honest about that fear.
When you, Amanda, were talking about the challenges and kind of challenge is a fear, I immediately thought of my 7th grade math department, and it's made up of 3 of us, and along with 2 intervention specialists, and we work together so well. We meet multiple times a day, and I mean, I would be lying to say if we weren't overwhelmed at the thought of detracking at first. It was definitely a challenge, but we kind of had 2 options. We could either face it head on and dive in, or we could kind of be afraid of it, be afraid of the challenge. And I can say as a 7th grade math department, 8th grade as well, we really just took on the challenge, and we hit the ground running. And it's not easy when we have, a wide range of ability levels within our classroom, talking, anywhere from 20 to 25 students, ranging from 5th percentile to 93rd percentile, and I'm supposed to teach them proportionality, but I have students that are still struggling with, identifying fractions. It's definitely a challenge, but as a department, we have come together and we've kind of come up with ways of how we can make sure that we're reaching all of our students. So one way that we've tackled that challenge is we do what we call leveled practice. So we have, an example of it would be we have 3 levels. And so level 2 is just, it's the standard. This is our expectation that when the test rolls around, everybody is able to do the problems that are on level 2. And level 1 are kind of like the prereq skills that students need to have mastered before being able to be successful with level 2. And then level 3 takes it to the next level. It's enrichment, extension problems. And so what we do is we use formative assessments to figure out what levels students will be completing. They do not have to complete all 3, they have to complete 2, and one of the 2 levels must be level 2. And then that allows us to be able to provide students, meet them where they are and provide them with work that they need to be, that's rigorous for them, that they need to be working on, knowing that at the end of the day, when the test comes, everyone's expected to have mastered level 2, which is like the state standard. So that's one of the challenges that we've had, and that's kind of how we as a department have solved that challenge.
Can you all talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions that either you had or that you've heard about with detracking and how you would respond to those misconceptions?
I'll speak to one misperception. We had a board meeting last year or so, and this really stuck with me. We had young people presenting to the board their perspectives on detracking and those of their peers. And a young woman said, you know, I'm not sure I buy into this idea. I don't like this idea because when we were in 5th grade and 6th grade, we did these incredible learning opportunities. We did Socratic seminars, we did debates, we did these interdisciplinary lessons, and we got to do all of these amazing projects. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that. And when I heard her say that, it dawned on me that we have work to do yet on communicating really what this is all about. Because as I sat there and I heard her say that, I said, really what you're describing is why we're doing this, so that each child, every child, has the benefit of those experiences. What she was describing was her enriched class in 5th and 6th grade. She was talking about these amazing things that she got to do, but what she was acknowledging was the core reason why we had to do this, was so that we had a system where all of our learners got those kinds of benefits. It's the same kind of story I heard, or I hear sometimes. I'll get a call, and it was funny. My new friends from Evanston, they say, yeah, we still get those calls. I'll pick up the phone and they say, hey, why do you hate AP? Why are you killing AP? I said, well, what do you mean? The point of detracking is to create a system in which programs like AP, programs like IB, College Credit Plus, Career Tech Ed thrive, and they thrive in a way that they are accessible to all of our students. Really, when we know we're doing this right, and I'm glad to have friends who can tell us what this might look like in a few years from now, we're going to have an incredibly robust AP program, more so than today, and it'll be a program that reflects the makeup, the values of this district. So those are some of the misperceptions that I encounter pretty frequently, and I'll add one more. Dr. Yurick introduced this idea of fear. Sometimes I get fearful in the middle of the night. You want to know that this is working. And as a person who's done some quantitative research, my training is as a biologist, my safety blanket is data. I claw for data. I claw for research. I want to know that this is working, and I want to know now. We've got a challenge on our hand. Dr. Glasner, you asked about what are some of our challenges. We have early promising data, and it's good, and we're happy to share that data. The challenge is, however, is that data is conflated with our young people's struggles in recovering from the pandemic, in contextualizing it with what the rest of the world, and certainly our country, is facing in the terms of the challenges that their youth are facing. So we can contextualize some of that. We can kind of look at, well, how are other districts doing? How are we doing? What's our secret sauce? How does detracking fit into that? But that is a challenge. And I would love to be able to say, hey, in 1 year, this is going to make a difference. The reality is we are working on a multi-year process to make sure that we are delivering the kind of education that young lady spoke at the board for all of our kids. And I think given time, we're going to have the data to show for that.
I have some pretty disgusting misperceptions that came up in our community. One was that if you're moving all of those kids into AP, is it really AP? Right? Is it really still AP? Well, that's layered with racism. And we heard things like, well, this is really a different form of reparations, right? This is the district, and we actually now do have an official reparations policy in Evanston. It has nothing to do with the high school. It was actually about redlining and real estate and all that. That's a separate conversation. But back in 2010, you know, people got up and said in forums like this, well, this is all about reparations. And we were saying, well, this is really about educational equity. So it was pretty ugly, the racism that we saw and what we were trying to do.
Well, I'll say a big misconception among kids among my age is they're all like, well, if we're all moving up, like, it's a big thing, and then they're all like, well, like, so do we have to, like, try more? Or they're like, well, we're not smart enough to do that class. Like, we can't do the enriched curriculum. And I think that, you start, again, with starting on the tracks in such a long, like, 5th and 6th grade, they start off and they're like, well, we can't be that smart. Like, we just can't do that class. And I think a big thing among kids my age and older, they're like, well, we can't do the harder curriculum. We're not smart enough to do that. Obviously, we didn't take that test in whatever 4th grade to dictate where we are, so obviously we shouldn't be in this class. Like, we're not. And it's all, I think a big part of it is a lot of the kids, like, you're told you're enriched, you're gifted, and like Belize said earlier. And I think changing, like, how we perceive and how we say it, like, mentally, like, saying those words to those kids, I think it feeds a lot of that. And then saying, well, like, this is like the core level class. This is your standard level class. Well, then they think they're like, oh, well, we're just basic level. We're just like the standard level. Like, we don't need to try hard in that. And I think that's a big misconception that's going on right now.
Maddie, I'm glad you said that. I had that experience as a teacher. When I was teaching AP Lit with the Avid kids in that environment, and I had a pretty close relationship with my Avid students at the time, and they came to me one morning after first period, and they said, Mr. Campbell, this class is racist, and we want to talk to you about it. And I was like, what? I was like, yeah, we need to see you. So I'm like, okay, here are my black and brown kids in Avid that I know pretty well accusing me as a black man of racism in this class that they wanted me to teach with them so they could be there. I said, okay, fine, you all come and talk to me. And they said, you know, we think this class is racist because we're working really hard. And I said, good. And then they said, well, the white kids, they're not working that hard. I said, how do you know that? Well, it just doesn't seem like they're not working that hard. I'm like, but they are. I said, they come to AM support just like you. I said, they're emailing me about these assignments just like you. They've had the number of revisions on these papers just like you. But why do you believe, for some reason, that you are not doing and working just as hard as them? And so then I pull up my grade book, right? And I pull up the grade book in a way that they couldn't see each other's names, which is just the ID numbers. And I said, tell me who's black and who's white based on these grades. Oh, we don't know. I said, exactly, because you're all working very hard, and you all can do this work. But I really want to understand why you all think, as black and brown kids, that there's this perception that you have of yourselves that they are not working, that they are working twice, or not working, that you're working twice as hard as them. Where does that belief come from? And guess what? Even if you are, that's okay, right? Because as I said earlier, I told them, I said, Heart of Darkness is hard for everybody. So unpacking these beliefs that even the kids bring to class is also a part of the work.
If I can jump in, I think a misconception from the other side of what Maddie was talking about is that these kids, mostly white, in the upper track were like, well, why are they in our class now? Like, are we stupid? You know, they had, at this point, formed kind of an ego, like, oh, you know, we're in the upper level class, you're in the lower level class. And I feel like that also discourages the people from the lower track coming up, because now they don't have support from other people who were already on the upper level track. How he was saying, oh, they thought they didn't have to work as hard, so it kind of discouraged them from wanting to try, because okay, you think I'm stupid, so now you think you're stupid because you're in the same class as me. It's a self-esteem issue.
I have one last question, and then we're going to open up the floor for community questions, so get your questions ready. We talked a little bit about the how. Ms. Robinson, you talked a little bit about the how. I'd love to hear a little more about how this actually works in a classroom. What are the things that we do or should be doing in a classroom to make this successful? Dr. Moore, you want to start?
Yeah, I would love to start on that one, because I think it gives me an opportunity to celebrate our elementary educator colleagues. I'll start there. We talk a lot about detracking and how it starts in 5th grade, and it's primarily a secondary issue. But if you go and you observe these elementary educators, they'll say, what are you talking about, detracking? What are you talking about tracking? What is all this about? Because for them, this is their everyday lived experience. Those educators find ways of using data to inform flexible grouping based on the task. So depending on what outcome they're seeking from the task, that dictates what kind of data they'll use to connect their kids. And they'll have those young people working in flexible, heterogeneous groups to the benefit of whatever kind of outcome, learning target that they're seeking. And they'll do this using data fluidly almost every day. They develop differentiated tasks based on reading levels or math groups or anything like that. But what's different about what they do is that these groups are flexible in the sense that you are not stuck in what some of us might remember like the Red Robin group for the whole year. It's the Red Robin group, because really that's tracking with a cute name. But they think about ways that they can connect kids to have meaningful conversations, meaningful learning opportunities with tasks that better not just struggling learners, and I think that's key, but that better everybody who's in that mix having some of those learning opportunities. I'll also highlight another group of teachers who are working together on this concept of building thinking classrooms. And building thinking classrooms by Lindenhall, it's this idea, it's taken root a little bit with our teachers around a way of structuring classes with whiteboards on the wall. Young people are up and out of their chairs, actively constructing knowledge at the board in communal ways. They all have to have the pen, they all have to be standing, they all have to be collaborating on these tasks. When you construct learning environments like that, oftentimes what you'll see is young people thrive, and you tap into each of their fund of knowledge. Every one of those kids is bringing some valuable learning knowledge. And when you structure it in such a way where you're not dictating, you're not looking for one specific answer, but you're really creating space for them to bring what they know, oftentimes we can sit back and be amazed by what they do. So those are a couple opportunities I think about that come straight to my head about when I see this being done well. I think about purposeful, intentional, but flexible groups. I think about constructivist learning targets where young people are actively engaged. And I think about our teachers who construct opportunity for kids to bring their own strengths and skills to the table.
I gotta jump in and
Please
just say hallelujah. Because what Dr. Moore just hit on is the crux of this particular framework. So Dr. Moore just mentioned the flexibility of groupings, the dynamic nature of data-responsive instruction. This is crucial. This sounds like a lot of buzzwords, and how does this look, and how do you make that work? In real time, in the academic world, the educator world, this is called a multi-tiered system of support. And what that means is students are receiving very specific supports and enrichment on exactly what they're learning, exactly where they're at day to day in the moment. This doesn't wait for a standardized test score to come rolling in 3 times a year. This is integrated into the classroom, and this ensures that every student is working toward their maximum potential, and that these are not fixed placements. This is really crucial. We don't say, oh, this student's going to get the tutoring support for the rest of the semester because they're a lower performer. This is, in this particular unit, these students are excelling and these students are struggling, and they're getting that individualized support in real time in the classroom by trained professionals, not by a computer program they're sitting in front of. and they are being able to access their optimal potential. We are taking out of the equation these classifications that we rely on. I rely on them. They're gifted, they're in special ed, and instead we're making it individualized instruction. All of this instruction is individualized, and this dynamic, data-driven flexibility in the classroom is what makes this work. And without that, this doesn't work. This is just another form of limited tracking. So I think Dr. Moore hit the nail on the head. How does this work? Multi-tiered systems of support in practice effectively. That's how this works.
Anybody? Ms. Robinson.
My go-to was going to be that we were just constantly using flexible grouping based on immediate feedback of where they currently are, what they need in order to be successful and achieve the standard that we're currently working on, and it's constantly changing, the flexible grouping.
May I take one more shot at it?
Go for it.
Okay, thanks. I want to speak to of what we're working towards aspirationally. Particularly as an IB district, we are committed to concept-based learning. And that's a lot of fancy talk for meaning we are giving your children real-world problems that they can wrestle with. And the beauty about that kind of learning is that everybody can access it with that concept of low floor, high ceiling, that it provides an opportunity for everybody to get connected with things that matter. Global food crises, war, conflict, that we provide an opportunity for young people to engage. The beauty of that kind of learning, too, is there's no ceiling. That those young people who may be accelerated or gifted or that they love that subject, when you start to tackle some of those UN goals or you tackle things like what we're seeing in the world today, there's no limit to the attempts to try to solve these issues. It provides the opportunity for young people to stretch and push in ways that you're not going to see if you're opening up the textbook and going page to page. That's not what we're about. That's not what we try to be. And I would say when we aspire to that, this is going to continue to go better.
All right, thank you for that. You will have a chance, everybody on the panel, to keep sharing your insight and perspective. So we're going to open up the floor for community questions. Kristen Miller, one of our communications directors, is going to be bringing a microphone up here. What I'm going to ask folks to do is to line up behind the microphone. We have about an hour, so hopefully we'll get to most, if not all, questions. And I know this is probably something you've heard before. We do ask that you try to keep your questions succinct. And also, we appreciate your input. We also want to give the panelists a chance to respond to questions. So keep that in mind as you come up. So folks who want to start, please come up to the microphone. Thank you. And if you could introduce yourself when you ask a question, that would be great. Thank you. If you could introduce yourself when you ask a question, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patrick.
Ooh, hold on a second. We're working on it. Let's see. Is it on? Chuck, is it on?
Thank you. My name is Patrick Azori. This question is for Ms. Robinson. How has your approach to teaching the material changed as a result of detracking, and how do you adequately challenge each student? Thank you.
So I would say that it's definitely changed from when we previously tracked. Because I have such a wide range of ability levels, I have to be able to provide my students with questions or problems that are engaging to all learners. So we definitely have incorporated more of the low floor, high ceiling questions that allow all students to find success in answering them, because like Dr. Moore just said, there is no ceiling. My teaching has definitely incorporated kind of like 3, I guess, different activities or lessons within a lesson, so that I can reach all of my different ability levels within our classroom. So definitely a lot more station work, a lot more group work, rotations, individualized small group instruction, for sure.
Thank you. Why don't we go to the next question for panelists? Some of these questions may be directed to individuals. Obviously, feel free to jump in if you have other things to add.
Right.
Go for it.
My question is specific. I have a loud voice. My question is specifically for Dr. Moore. You were making reference of a student who was looking back on her 5th grade experience and the wonderful things they did in enriched language arts, a Socratic debate, I believe, and things like that. I have 3 children who represent the great success and the great failures of the Shaker schools, aged 28 through 34. 2 of the 3 were in the enriched language arts, and I knew a lot of their friends. In the enriched language arts, they got some great experiences, as did so many others. But many of their classmates could barely put together a complete sentence. So as a classroom teacher in 5th grade, not a PhD at Cleveland State or at Harvard, but as a classroom teacher in 5th grade, when you have a mixture of students, some of whom are destined for great things, and some of whom might someday be destined for great things, but today can't put together a complete sentence, how do you teach them both without tracking?
And can you just share your name before you leave the microphone?
Oh, I'm very sorry. My name is Bob Kimmelfield. I live in the Onaway neighborhood.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. This actually ties back to one thing I mentioned about concept-based instruction. So without getting too far into learning theory here, I want to recognize the point that Bob's making, that we do have young people coming to us in classes now with a wide range of abilities. That is true. That is true. But the beauty of our learning model and what our teachers strive to do is to provide differentiated access to high-order thinking or learning targets. And I want to be plain about what I might mean by that. We have things like word walls, anchor charts, structures or strategies that teachers can engage with so that young people can still access higher-order thinking. They can still be a part of that Socratic seminar, even in situations where, I'll be honest, maybe they hadn't read the night before. But what our effective, really best case teachers will do is provide learning structures that give them access to be a participant in those kinds of conversations or debates. In fact, I heard an example of that earlier tonight, where when we're differentiating well, some young people will be given the task to read, to annotate, to dictate whatever it is in the text. Others will have access provided, perhaps in the form of an audiobook, perhaps in the form of a video summary. The point, however, is by providing different access to the material, they can all come to that higher order thinking task together. So that whether it is that Socratic seminar, which oftentimes requires dialogue and collaboration, a lot of these skills that we really care about, if on the back end we've provided differentiated access, the goal remains the same. The goal to participate in that higher order thinking, that dialogue, that Socratic seminar can remain the same if you've differentiated in such a way that you've done it on the back end without lowering expectations on the front end, which is that higher order thinking task. I have a feeling you might have some really important things to say about this.
I just want to jump in. So the things we're teaching our teacher candidates are to look at a challenging task such as was posed. You have an English class, and we have students engaged in Socratic method dialogue, and then we have students who can't write a complete sentence, and what do you do with that? So we look at things very technically in terms of inputs and outputs. So what is the material that is being presented, or the content, we call it the antecedent, that's coming instructionally, and then what is the output or the student response to that input and antecedent. And you might have students who are over there engaged in debate and Socratic dialogue, and they are fleshing out very advanced types of concepts and ideas, and then you have the student over here who can't write a complete sentence, and will be presented with that same concept and may be speaking thoughts into a screen scribe, where they're not writing the complete sentence yet, but they're speaking their thoughts, and their task is then to modify their output by revising their sentence, expanding their sentence, and coming back to that writing task to expand what they need support on. So we look at the input, we look at the output. We look at the performance of each individual student working with the same concept and the same curriculum, and then we take what they're currently doing, we modify that input and output with supports, and then we advance their particular skill set in real time in the moment, and that's what teachers are trained to do.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brooke Bribriesco. I just want to start off by saying thank you to Belize and Maddie for being here. You guys have done a fantastic job. And I think your honesty tonight was really powerful. So I have a question overall about interventions for everybody. But Dr. Campbell, I think you mentioned the use of interventions a lot when you rolled this out in Evanston. And I think that the Shaker Heights rollout was much different, right? This happened during the pandemic, and I think the difference between the juniors and our students at Woodbury will be dramatically different. I think, Belize, you mentioned a lot about the self-esteem that goes with the tracking. So I'm just curious, from a student perspective, as we're looking for that golden area, I don't remember how you phrased it, but that good spot, what interventions would have been helpful, Belize and Maddie, when you guys were in the 8th grade, potted up in mixed level ability classes? Dr. Campbell, what interventions do you think were super helpful from a teacher's perspective? Maybe if we could just talk a little bit about that, I'd be so happy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brooke.
I can go first. Honestly, I think Shaker has the clubs, the organizations already put together, such as Bridges and Rising Stars, which are pushing to help Black students enroll in these higher classes or succeed in these higher classes. But as Dr. Campbell stated earlier, it's the buy-in. What is going to make these Black students want to be a part of this, and who is going to encourage them to want to be a part of those programs?
So what we did system-wide, we engaged what we call an SOS, our Systems of Support, where we built in support time as tier 1 for all of the kids in the school. So we redesigned the school day for supports. We adjusted the bell schedule, and instead of starting school at 8:05, which we had done forever, school then started at 8:35, where we had a half an hour every morning, every day, for students to drop in for supports. We also built in what we call academic study centers, which we staff with teachers' supervisory duties all day, so kids could drop in on their free periods or whenever they needed to, and there were supports available from certified teachers during the day. We also opened supports after school, so we had support before school, during school, after school. And then we created, our mascot is the Wild Kit. Northwestern is Wildcats, and so we're Wild Kit. And we started Wild Kit Academy, which was a Saturday program for kids where we paid teachers above like 3 times almost the contractual curriculum rate through title funds to come on Saturdays and provide tutoring for kids on the weekends. And then teachers could also run special programs. So if there were complex, sophisticated lessons in labs coming up in science, that teacher would come to Wild Kid Academy, get paid through the district to be there, and then ask any kid who was going to be doing those labs to come and get supports on the weekends. So we normalized supports and destigmatized support in a high rigorous environment so that every kid, it didn't matter what your background was, what side of town you lived on, everybody was taking advantage of the supports that we had put in place.
At the middle school, some supports that we have in place for students too. We have reader time available twice a week where students can come up and meet with their math teacher, their Lang and Lit teacher, any other teachers. They have time built into the week, but math and Lang and Lit have 2 days built into their week where students can bring their lunch up to the classroom and receive extra help, retake tests, review what's being taught, pre-teach upcoming concepts. So we have that opportunity for students to take advantage of. We also have the Cleveland State tutors that are pushing into math classrooms at the moment. And we also offer Math and Reading 180. So those are 2 workshop model classes. We have a math workshop and a reading workshop that students can take that for our struggling learners that need that extra dose of math and extra dose of reading built into their schedule on a daily basis.
I just want to jump in real quick and mention Maddie brought up earlier. She said, I asked her about the challenges with the different curriculum she was experiencing, and she said some of us, could have private tutors, and this is an economic equity issue. She said some of us got private tutors, and then I don't know about the rest. If you can't afford tutoring, what are you doing? So I just want to take a moment to put out there that the partnership from not just the school district, but extending to your K-16 partners, including university, is so crucial to be able to bring tutors in that nobody pays for. We at the Community Learning Center provide completely free academic supports both after school, Saturday programs, remote learning programs, as well as in-person push-in. And these supports exist for all learners at no cost to families.
I just want to connect with one thing briefly of what Ms. Robinson said. She mentioned these math and reading workshop classes. This is the power of and, meaning to say when we started to think about the system and changing this system, young people used to be in grade level math or workshop math. What all the research indicates is that if you are not in a grade level class, you will never get on grade level. That's the power of shifting the and. So now we have young people who are in 7th grade math, and if they need extra supports, they're getting that double dose or supplemental math curriculum. It's not an or anymore. We still have work to do on how you schedule all that, and we have room to grow, but I think that was a powerful shift in our practices.
Dr. Moore, before we get to the next question, I know this has come up a couple of times. Do we have data on AP enrollment and IB diploma program enrollment, where it's at? Do we know whether these are the courses that have been affected by detracking yet or not? Because it's just come up a couple of times that I thought maybe you could give some clarity.
Yeah, we are early in that stage yet. You have to figure this is year really 3 for us, and we are living in unprecedented times in the sense of young people coming out of the challenges we saw in COVID. That being said, our AP numbers are up. Those AP numbers are more diverse than before. We have not quite seen that yet in IB. I was encouraged. I'm hearing that that's really pretty universal. Again, that is one of our metrics, our leading metrics of success on this. Evanston saw it. I believe we are seeing it, and that will increase.
Thank you. All right, next question.
Hi, my name is Marie, and I have a quick introduction and 2 questions that I think are, because they're more about younger kids, really directed at Dr. Moore and Dr. Glasner. So I graduated from Shaker in '97. I went to Shaker K through 12. I was in all AP and advanced classes, and I think more than a lot of my classmates, I was acutely aware that I was in one of 2 schools. I was in the school for white kids who had smart parents, and there was a different school, and those kids were treated differently. In middle school, I had to take a government class because an advanced government class didn't fit into my schedule, and it was a disaster. That teacher was, I won't go into it. The moral of the story is, since I was a kid, I have been convinced that Shaker is a place that talks the talk and doesn't always walk the walk. And I came here tonight hoping to be persuaded that this is part of walking the walk, because I've done a lot of reading on detracking, and the hard evidence is really mixed. So after hearing Dr. Yurick and Dr. Campbell talk about all the interventions and the other individual outreach and the teacher training that needed to happen, and then thinking about the conversations I've had with Shaker teachers, I'm not totally persuaded that Shaker has been as thorough in the rollout of detracking as they should have been. So here, I'm getting to my 2 questions now, and I'm sorry for the long introduction. First, there are interventions that are proven to work to decrease inequitable education outcomes, like full-day universal pre-K. And Shaker has been dragging their feet on that for years. And when we moved here from Vermont, my oldest kid's kindergarten year, and it was a disaster. She had been in an education-oriented preschool, and she walked into a kindergarten classroom with kids who had been in the same situation she'd been in, kids who'd had 1 year of pre-K, kids who'd been in let them play and keep them alive preschool, and kids who'd had no educational experience at all. Those teachers had aides for the first 8 weeks of the school year, and it felt like, I have no quarrel with the teachers, but I had a quarrel with the system that asked them to deal with a classroom of 23 kids with no support coming from wildly varying educational backgrounds at the beginning there. So my first question is, when is Shaker going to get around to universal full-day pre-K? Because that works. That is proven, that's proven to work. And my second question is, my kids currently are in 3rd and 5th grade. They both skipped a grade to get there. They remain in the upper echelons of their class. That's my kids. Both of them, when I went to Shaker, I was a huge nerd, and the pull-out programs that started in 1st grade saved me. It was the only place I could be as truly nerdy as I was. 4th grade in the general classroom, resulted in a fight between me and everybody else in the class, where I put my foot down on the meaning of some literature and everyone else insisted the Disney version was better. Like, I needed those pull-out classes. Those are not available to my kids, which in and of itself, I don't have a problem with. What I have a problem with is that both of them are learning most of their math from computers. And my third grader, who likes multiplication and division and likes to think about negative numbers, by his computer is being asked to do problems that ask him to subtract 2 from 16. And my fifth grader, I'm not even sure what she's doing, but she's telling me she's bored. So my second question, in addition to when is Shaker going to do universal full-day pre-K, so that parents who work full-time can take advantage of it and not have to send their kids to keep you alive daycare. My second question is there any evidence that the computer programs that Shaker is using actually teach anything? And if in the absence of that evidence, when is Shaker going to take other steps to, because by the time you get to 5th grade, kids have had this entire experience behind them, and it seems like if you really want to improve equitable outcomes, it should start really early, like when they're 3 and 4. So those are my 2 very long questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't I start with pre-K, and then if you want to talk about some of the early grades learning. I know this forum or panel is not about our facilities plan. Many folks in the audience may be aware that we are in the process of working to implement a long-term facilities plan that includes expanding our pre-K programming. We're in the process of starting the renovation of the Ludlow School building so that we can increase the number of seats for pre-K for a lot of the reasons that you just described. A couple of things I would note. Our goal is to ensure that all students in Shaker Heights have access to a high-quality and affordable pre-K program. That requires us to expand our own capacity for pre-K. It also requires us to work in partnership with a lot of the other high-quality pre-K providers that already exist in our school district. Also, pre-K is a little different than K through 12 education. It is not funded by the state or by the federal government, and so anything we do is on our own dime, essentially. And so that is something that we are cognizant of. We hope to one day be able to get to that place you described, universal free pre-K for all students. That's not the world that we unfortunately currently live in, but we're going to do our best to make sure that all students have access to a high-quality pre-K program. That includes full-day options, including before care and after care for families who need it, or half-day options for families who prefer that. So do you want to talk about some of the instructional stuff?
When you asked your question and you talked about the math program and elementary and engaging our young people, 2 things really came to mind. Well, really 3, and I want to start with the first one, that if you have, as a community member or as a parent, some of these concerns, my child's on the computer too much or they're not getting what they need, I would say first and foremost, reach out to the teacher and have that conversation. I would just start by saying that. From a structural or systemic standpoint, a few things come to mind. One, you actually heard Ms. Robinson talk about this earlier, but that's really our model at elementary. And it's what I see when I do my learning walks as recently as Tuesday at Lomond. I saw 3 cases of this where young people over the course of their math block or their literacy block will move through 3 or 4 stations. And you'll see the timer on the board and it counts down. And the young people, they get it. They know exactly where to go when that bell rings, and they'll do it 4 times. And one of those stations generally is some sort of tech-based adaptive system, whether it's math, Waterford, Raz Plus for kids. We have a lot of those resources where the teacher can use that to differentiate. Now, why would you have those young people engaging on that computer at that time? Well, one, for those 10 minutes, it should be, and in this case it sounds like it's not, it's worth a follow-up, it should be targeting their specific needs. That's why we pay for these adaptive programs. Simultaneously, you'll have a young person working or a group of young people working with a small group with the teacher. They're getting that one-on-one touch point. You'll have a small group working on an independent study and so on and so forth. So that technology really does, in my mind, it has a place and time, and I see it largely being used effectively in our schools. This sounds like a case where that may not be, and we should follow up on that. The other important thing, I think, to note is that recently, well, not so recently, maybe 4 or 5 years by now, we adopted Bridges Conceptual Math Program. And it's the first time where I think I really saw that when you do a curriculum adoption process right, which means it's inclusive, it's collaborative with teachers, you can get really great results. And that's what I see. Our elementary teachers tell us that this curriculum works. It's the Bridges curriculum. And most importantly, when I go to classes, I hear young people say, I love math. These are my big indicators for, hey, we're doing something right there. So those are the two big structural elements that I'm thinking when you ask that question, but really underlying it both is when your child does have that kind of challenge or we're not meeting their needs, that should invite a conversation with the educator and beyond if need be.
Thank you. Why don't we go to the next question? Thank you.
I don't want to blow everybody away. So I want to thank Dr. Glasner and the school district for having this forum. We're 2 or 3 years in Detracking, and this is the first deliberative forum I've seen. There's been board meetings where you've talked about it, and I think that we need more of this. We need to do it more broadly. I think it's really important. The best example of detracking is Montgomery County that I know of in Maryland, where they did a whole county, and there was a set of norms. They went and had coffees throughout the county, and it's the most, the best example of equity building I've ever seen. So I suggest you read Stacy Childress's book, Leading to Equity. I've told you about it, Dr. Glasner. I think it's an important thing for the district. And I think the research needs to be based on, what has happened where people have done this well. My question is, how are we supporting teachers? I was a teacher at one time, and we're expecting a lot. Multi-tier systems of support. I mean, you guys were poetic, right? But sometimes it's hard to turn poetry into prose and the day-to-day lived experience of teachers. And so if you're going to have flexible grouping, somebody's going to have to monitor the data to study who moves up and who doesn't. If you're going to have detracking where you have varied abilities in a classroom, how are you training teachers to do that? So what multi-tier systems of supports do we have? What kind of training have we done for teachers so we're not just putting them in a situation that is extremely difficult? Because my head was spinning. I don't know, I'm older. I don't know if I could teach today in that type of classroom. Right. I'm serious. It's a lot. So what kind of training have you done?
Ms. Robinson, do you want to start with that one, and then maybe others can pick it up?
Sure.
Thank you for the question.
So some of the support that we have, I'll start off by saying we have phenomenal curriculum coaches, IB coordinators. We get release days to work on writing our curriculum. We have common planning time built in with our department on a daily basis. We're all off on the same period. We also share the same lunch. We have professional learning opportunities that are offered on PD days, as well as going away for professional learning opportunities. And we also had Westwind come in and work with us. That was a piece to the puzzle. But those are just some of the learning opportunities that come to mind immediately. You could probably elaborate more.
I think you hit a lot of them. I might add just a few more, and I will humbly submit to the crowd that we have a lot of room to grow. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Even next week or so, we're sending a team of teachers to Rick Wormelli down at the Summit ESC on his differentiation boot camp. Why I say I must humbly recognize the point, however, we're doing that kind of work. It needs to be systematic, it needs to be ongoing, and I mean, even our colleagues from Evanston talked about today that they were doing intensive 6 to 8 month cycles, is that right? 6 to 8 month cycles on differentiation in a job-embedded way with their teacher team. So I think that we are doing a good amount of professional learning. Our next level of work is to do things in a systematic, coherent way.
Right.
And, as you heard Ms. Robinson say, she sold herself short in the sense of this cannot happen without deep collaboration time, and they are a model for this. I see the way that they work together so that no one teacher is developing those 3 levels of tasks you described. Right. But they have 3 teachers work in collaboration every day so that they can work to make that done. Even that, we can certainly continue to grow.
Yeah, so it doesn't sound in Shaker, systematic. It sounds a little bit like noodles on the wall, which is fine. You're saying you're going to build a systematic approach, but it doesn't feel like it quite is yet. And Dr. Glasner, you told me that we were going to level up by pushing gifted coordinators in the classroom so that they could teach teachers how to teach in a differentiated way. We have 2 gifted intervention specialists to deal with a lot of teachers, 5 through 9. So I hope the district looks at Stacy Childress's work in Montgomery County, Maryland, and I hope we have some systematic training so the poetry you talked about tonight can become prose tomorrow.
I do want to note one thing, because I think your point is incredibly important in the types of services and support we provide to our teachers. I will say, as a district, we believe in the power of job-embedded professional learning. You heard Ms. Robinson talk a little bit about that, because what that means is it's not you go to Romelli's workshop one time, you come home, and you're expected to do it on your own. We have tried very hard with examples like our gifted intervention specialists. Yes, they are going in and they're pushing in and working with small groups of children, but they've also trained, at this point, 15 hours with our teachers on gifted education. So the idea that they're going to serve all children, that's not reality. However, how can we utilize their expertise to train the teachers so that we are hitting each child? So some of that, I think we have a lot of room to grow. Our model, I do think, is set up that when we've defined what that professional learning looks like, we've got structures in place to make sure it stays.
So what's interesting, you said when we define it. We're 3 years in, and we're still trying to define the professional learning our teachers need to teach our kids. I don't want to go any further.
Sure.
Accept your answer. We need a systematic approach to multi-tiered systems of support, to differentiated learning and flexible grouping. Thanks.
I'm with you there. And the idea that this will look perfect at some point, or that we will have mastered differentiation, I think this is a journey that will go on in an ongoing way. And I wonder, you're 15 years down the line. Have you made it? Have you arrived at where you're supposed to be?
Well, it's everything's a work in progress. But I will say that the only reference we had was Leading for Equity, was that text, and we hung on to that like it was like our system and our lives depended on it. We took our board through that reading. We took our teachers through that reading. It was I can't tell you how many copies of that book we bought just because it was the only reference point that we had to do our work, and it really, really was our guiding light. And we evolved over time, right? Our system, when we rolled it out, we wrote our assessments and designed our program in a semester, and that felt rushed. It felt overwhelming. And when we were detracking geometry, my colleague over there, Dr. Bavis, talked about how we were burning out our math teachers, right? Based on what we designed, and when we detract geometry, the teachers were like, this is not working. We are burnt out. And this was pre-pandemic burnout, right? So, and we had to make some adjustments. We had to continue to collaborate with our teachers and listen to the feedback and allow them to tell us what is the best path forward, right? If we all believing this as a goal and as a value, and we changed mid-year, like the school year had already started, and we redesigned what our detract geometry course looked like because our teachers were like, we can't do this.
Ms. Robinson, I couldn't tell if you wanted to add something. If not, happy to go to the next question. All right, next question.
Hi, my name's Kate Reddy. I moved to the district in June from Atlanta, and I looked at a lot of different school districts before moving here and talked to quite a few people and was aware of what was going on and still chose Shaker Heights because I believe it's a special community. Dr. Campbell, my question is mostly for you. My field is public health, so I know this is systems change, and systems change takes a long time. Can you shed light on the in-between years, the growing pains, and about how long that might take? And then, after spending a day here, do you have thoughts on approaches that Evanston has taken that maybe you're not seeing yet in Shaker Heights to engage and listen to the teachers, engage the community that has gone to private schools, that sort of thing?
Well, what we saw today was just like our experience. It was not unlike our experience. What we saw today was a lot of collaboration from teachers, a lot of conversations with teachers about what they were doing. We had a lot of growing pains. We started out, the way we started out isn't the way we look like now. We had multiple iterations of what, what our classes look like per se, but definitely how we were maintaining a rigorous coursework in those classes and what that meant for our students. So we did something that was a little, unique, I guess, in that we designed an earn honors program. So we put everybody in the class that they could earn honors over the course of the semester by demonstrating proficiency on a series of assessments. That is how we raised the expectations, and teachers were collaborating on what those common assessments looked like. They began to collaborate on formative assessments, all of the summative assessments, and that changed over time. And we realized that, instead of having all of our kids and all of our students, take a common assessment on a particular day, we were not accounting for, how students were learning the material. So we moved from having one day of a common assessment to more of a window of when we were offering that. And so we were doing that in real time with teachers because, Pete said all day today, don't fall in love with an idea, because there was a lot of change and a lot of evolution in this process. And as I said, a lot of difficult conversations because all we had was the Montgomery County book, and we had no models. We actually went out to Brookline, Massachusetts at one point, who had done some detracking efforts out there. But we felt like we were really on our own. And so our challenging points were when we realized that we didn't have to be so lockstep across 800 kids, because when we detrack, we're talking about 800 kids across, 22 sections of, and for English and history, for example. And we realized that we needed to make some adjustments. And then we waited, right? We detracked English and history and biology, and then we had to wait. How is this going? Because we wanted to keep going, right? Now everything is detracked in the district pretty much. But in that waiting time, we were doing a lot of learning, a lot of reading. Our teachers were still doing a lot of training. We were looking at data and trying to really figure out how does that data is going to inform not only our professional development, but how does it inform how we're also supporting teachers in the evaluation process. So we rewrote the evaluation rubric for teachers to support them even better and have them to be a part of that process. And so this was a multi-level, multi-system approach that dealt with so many aspects of our district and of our system that took a lot of time to think about and a lot of trouble and challenges that we had to overcome. And I don't know if Pete, our assistant superintendent over there, had anything to add to that, but it was definitely a work in progress. I keep saying that.
Yeah, what Dr. Campbell's talking about really is listening to teachers, being responsive. One of the things we did early on was we had an administrative huddle every morning. I met with our department chairs who had detracked every morning from 7:30 to 9 a.m., and it was a rapid response team. We would deal with issues and concerns. If a teacher, if there was an issue with an assessment, if there was an issue on instruction, it came to us, and then we agreed with our faculty that we would get back to them within 24 hours with an answer. You only do that when you have a commitment, and we were very serious about the commitment. We listened, and we were responsive. Sometimes we dug our heels in because we felt we had to, especially the first year where it was lockstep, because everyone was watching. Teachers were watching, parents were watching, kids were watching. So at that time,
community was watching.
And everybody. So it was really important to have these days where kids would have these experiences. So like on February 3rd, everybody was doing an on-demand essay. And the whole town was talking about February 3rd, which is exactly what you want because you set an expectation, you have the instruction, you have the event, and then you analyze the data, you make the instructional decisions, and you move on. So that was the first few years were these rigid dates, and then we opened it up to windows because as Dr. Campbell said, not everybody's ready on February 3rd. Instructionally, it varies, right, by classroom. If you teach the same class to 3 different sets of kids per day, they're all in different spots, right? All those classes. So we opened up windows. So we did windows, we modified assessments, we changed our assessment profile for honors credit. Each year we modified it. We made mistakes. One of the first things we did was a reading assessment. We wrote a great reading assessment. I'll put it up against any standardized test because the results were the same as a standardized test. So that was something we were like, oh yeah, we were in love with it. Thought this was the best thing, but it replicated. It wasn't skills-based, it wasn't developmental-based. It was literally just, where are they? And then we made the mistake of giving it like in September to freshmen. So we really weren't assessing anything that we taught. So we made mistakes. We owned those mistakes and we made changes because at the end of the day, we wanted to get it right because we wanted to prepare kids. Our target was always to increase access and success in advanced placement courses. We wanted to increase our enrollment and our success in those courses, and that's what we saw. We mirrored assessments based on that, but like I said, we didn't get it right all the time, but we certainly were responsive to folks, and I think that went a long way to building trust, not just with our teachers, but with our community at large. We were noted for that. All right, I have a question. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. Well, the next person coming up, I'm sure the community here is seeing this already. We're very excited about having this opportunity, both for the Evanston folks to help answer questions here, and we've spent the day with them and have an ongoing relationship with them because there is an opportunity for us to continue to learn from the things that
we want you to come to Evanston.
Hey, that's coming up next, so we're looking forward to that opportunity.
Hey, thank you so much for having this forum. My name is Scott Robertson. I have a kid in Woodbury and Boulevard. I guess my question is mostly for Drs. Moore and Glasner. I think from the panel we've heard a lot of positive testimonials and anecdotes about the Detracking experience. Like Dr. Moore, you described some situation about you notice kids of different learning abilities collaborating closely, and that sounded really amazing. But I've also know about a lot of maybe not so positive testimonials and anecdotes about the detracking process. And I guess my question is Shaker Heights going to be responsive to maybe some of the less positive feedback you get and take it as seriously as maybe the nicer feedback that tells you, you're going in the right direction, everything's good? I think that's my question.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Thank you for the question. Yes is the short answer. That's one of the reasons why we're here, to hear your questions, to help be responsive to those questions. We've made iterations over the course of this process, even though it's still young, and we expect to continue to do that. And generally, of course, I want to be clear, there are lots of positive things I've seen in classrooms, talking with students, teachers, and others about detracking. I also know, of course, both, there are things about the process that we would love to do differently, and there are things that are happening in classrooms that we continue to want to improve. Generally, what I find is the challenges that we experience aren't necessarily about detracking. They're about good instruction in general. So when I go to a class and I see students not engaged, it's not necessarily because there's a heterogeneous group of students in the classroom. It's because there are instructional strategies that we can be implementing or curriculum that we could be using that maybe would better engage those students, regardless of whether it's a heterogeneous or inclusive classroom. But bottom line, to answer your question, we are continuing to grow and improve and strengthen the work that we're doing. We expect to keep doing that.
Yeah, I think our responsiveness to that feedback is essential. Because in many ways, as Dr. Campbell has said, we are iterating, we are learning, we are growing to create a system that actually works for all of our kids. I also want to recognize that when I share about my perspectives, my experiences here, I can talk about the system, I can talk about our aspirations, because I am setting out, I think, for our team the goal, and in some ways celebrating the work that I see happening to make this a reality. That doesn't mean that I don't have any sort of idea of parent concerns or young people's concerns, and I certainly tour the school and I see things that we can continue to work on. What I'm recognizing is that we have a needle to thread here, where we can really talk about and establish a vision for what we want these classes to look like. And we've talked a lot about that, and we're seeing early examples, and you've heard about that here tonight. But make no bones about it, I recognize, as I think anyone here would say, that we also see areas to grow, and your feedback helps us to do that. When parents will call my office and they'll say, hey, this is my lived experience. Here's what I know we're trying to create, and frankly, I support that. Here's what I'm experiencing now. What can we do together about that? Those are actually terrifically helpful calls. And we've got parents who I think, like you, are incredibly invested in seeing this done well, and they want their kids to have a great experience in the meantime. So I do think that feedback is valued, it's heard, and we continue to work on it as we can.
Thank you.
Now, I am not a math teacher, but I'm looking at the number of folks still wanting to ask questions and the amount of time that we said we have. I want to be clear, we may not get to every question publicly tonight. Our communications team may be able to provide either index cards or places to write additional questions, because we also have a landing page on our website for Detracking. Your questions will help us add information to that site. And so hopefully, if we can't answer questions in person tonight, we will have an opportunity to answer them virtually afterwards. So we still have time for more questions, but I just want to throw that out there. Go ahead.
Alan Eckhouse, class of 2007. I'll keep it tight. We got admins, we got teachers, we got students. Great stuff so far. Where do guidance counselors fit in the equation?
Dr. Campbell, you want to start with that one? Talk about your experience with guidance counselors? Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Our counselors, it's an interesting question. Once we got rid of the cut scores from those tests, those conversations became a little bit irrelevant. That you just, this was the class that the students were taking, especially at the freshman level. But now, as we've detracked and we're having more success with students of color taking advanced placement courses, we created a whole push around AP and actually have had to create a series of procedures in our student services department where kids would be taking the right amount of AP classes and not too many AP classes, and we actually wrote a covenant back in the day about what students were getting into. And so now that conversation is still slow for us as we figure a lot of this out. How are we careful in how we steer students of color into advanced placement courses, and how to have that conversation and set those expectations without lowering expectations, because by telling kids and families of color, maybe you shouldn't take that AP class or you shouldn't take that course. It used to happen, at the freshman level. Now it's that grade 10, one-on-one that the counselor does with the family. And so we've opened up AP, but there's still a conversation that is very sensitive around who are we guiding to where, although now we have more students prepared to be in that space.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Eric Mish. I'm a Fernway father. Thank you to Dr. Glasner for hosting this, and thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciate your time tonight. First question for Dr. Marcus, Cubs or White Sox?
Oh, man. It's a little tough. I'm a South Sider, but definitely a Cubs fan.
Okay. Lighten it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I was curious about understanding the track classes, and I heard some talk about how it could have led to segregation, which sounds awful. I had just a couple clarifications firstly on that, and then I was curious about outcomes as well. So the question about tracking is, how was it originally that students qualified for higher track classes? Like, was it assessments, was it scores? Maybe this would be like a more question for Shaker or Dr. Glasner. And was it possible to move in and out of track courses? And then could you be in higher tracks for some courses but not for others? Was that possible?
So to your first question of how might you get in that in 5th grade, initially that was a data-based conversation, and that oftentimes broke down. Parent advocacy was a big part of it, and what did happen, you said it might have led to segregation, it did. It was de facto segregation between the tracks of core and enriched, even though the intention there was for it to be a data-based, and we were helping all young people access this. That just wasn't the reality. And that's consistent across track systems. You'll see that replicated many times over. You know, tracks got their name because of the second part of your question, though. Once you are in that enriched, and you heard our young people talk about that, once you are in that class with, 95+% certainty, we knew where you'd be in 12th grade. Because they were so sticky, when you started your journey in 5th grade in core, you know what that core prepared you for? Oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, the next core class and the next core class. And very, very rarely would students migrate between those classes. The only other thing I want to say on that, our academic planning guide, this might have been 8 years ago, we went through that academic planning guide, and anywhere on an AP class or an IB class where it said, required this, or you had to have an A in the previous class, we removed all that, and it changed to recommended, recommended that you have the Algebra 2 and so on and so forth. Do you know the impact of that? Virtually nothing. And the reality was, because we could change the names, we could change the ways that you got into these classes at high school, we were still tracking kids insofar as preparation for those classes starting in 5th grade. So you can change the name, we change the requirements, but until we change the system, those young people, we weren't doing anything more or less to prepare them for those classes.
That's great. Thank you very much. And my last question is, I think mainly for Dr. Yurick, but I think that Dr. Campbell, you could offer some insights as well. Dr. Yurick, you mentioned driving outcomes. I can understand driving opportunities for sure, but driving outcomes was an interesting comment. And so if we could dig into that, maybe you could at least enlighten us about what are some of those, let's call them KPIs, because I come from the business world, key performance indicators, because you're data-driven as well, it sounds like a lot of you. What are some of those? What do those look like? Is that SAT scores, college placement, job placement? Sometimes I think about, Germany or other places in the world that track entire schools. You go to the gymnasium if you're going to be preparing yourself for an academic career, or like a white-collar degree, let's say, at a lower school in blue-collar and so on. So maybe you can just enlighten us a little bit about like what outcomes you mentioned or were referring to, and like what do those KPIs look like, and maybe some examples in Evanston, like what you guys have looked at as that's advanced. Thanks.
I'll jump in first and quickly. Thank you for that question. That's a great framing of it, and I do talk in terms of data-driven outcomes, but you mentioned opportunities. Such a good distinction, but also connection. And what that means is, it is unequivocal. We have the data, we have the teaching technology, it is science and evidence-based that X can cause Y. This is not correlational, this is causation. And this is derived from an extensive body of quantitative research. I'm a quantitative researcher by design. We know what works to affect outcomes. What that means is, you implement X intervention, Y will occur when that intervention is implemented with fidelity. This isn't me saying it, this is vast, vast arrays of data. So we know what will improve outcomes. So if we define our outcome as, say, proficient reading, right? We define our outcome as skill-based abilities in mathematics, whatever level they may be. We know what causes those outcomes. They are evidence-based practice, they are replicable, the outcomes are replicable. You need those outcomes to contact those opportunities. They are not distinct, one precedes the next. You must have improved outcomes to contact those greater level opportunities. And when we deny kids the opportunity to contact those improved outcomes by tracking, we effectively completely cut off the opportunity at the knees. It's not a possibility. So one precedes the other. They're not disconnected. They're intimately connected. But thank you for that question.
Pete's got a response for that. Excuse me, is Dr. Davis back?
Hi, I'm back. So one of the things we did early on, we worked with our university partners. We had we had two economists, and educational researchers.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we'll probably get to these folks. Yeah, we'll be there. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I'll be quick. Two economists, some educational researchers, folks from American Institute for Research, and what they said was you needed a mix, right, of internal indicators and external indicators. And they said external indicators are important because you want to make sure that students are still going off to college, number one, that they're persisting in college, and that they're attaining and going to the colleges that they would have gone to before. So you're talking about tiering out a system of universities, right? And then you're saying, and then I said, well, how do you do that? And they said, these are economists, so they're very cut and dry. We'll just take the first 50 in Barron's and cut it right there. Okay, so then they looked at selective enrollment, they looked at all these things. And since we're Evanston, it's not just college ready. I don't know if you guys have had this discussion, but we actually had folks say, we want persistence to a third semester of college. That's about when the high school effect wears off. And I'm like, what, are you kidding? I'm like, we get you in the door, and so we ended up tracking that as well. And what we found out was that we did no harm, which is the number one thing, right? You don't want to do any harm, and we actually improved outcomes. The part where you're not going to see great outcomes are the non-selective enrollment, the open enrollment institutions. They change lives, but the numbers and the metrics, because they're in and out and there's a lot of fluidity. But we did see tier 2 and tier 1 institutions. We saw an increase in attendance and in persistence. And if you go to a tier 1 institution, you're probably going to succeed because they screen for that on the front end, to be honest. So all of those factors were in our favor. We tracked our SAT, at the time it was ACT scores, now it's SAT scores. And we tracked our AP, not just, we tracked our AP enrollments, but also our AP outcomes, scores of 3 and higher. But we also looked at scores of 2 and higher, because 2 indicates that you took the test seriously and you took some. We found, because we actually were able to do research on persistence, that taking an AP exam actually led to amazing outcomes. And if you took 2 exams, even better outcomes in college in terms of persistence and graduation. So we did all that, we were able to do it, and we found that we did well on those metrics. Internally, we looked at grades, we looked at grade reports, we looked at the percentage of kids earning honors credit, and we tracked that because that opened up opportunity, right? So those are some of the things. So it's a mix of internal indicators and external indicators, and then being transparent in that reporting.
And thank you very much. We also key performance indicators, music to my ears. We also have a set of KPIs that we look at. One thing I would add is we look at what I guess I would call quantitative metrics, kind of more traditional academic achievement metrics. We also look at qualitative metrics, really focusing on student sense of belonging, because we know that that's also an important piece to this work.
Hello, everybody. Garrett Dasco. I'm also a Fernway father, and I have to lean extraordinarily low to this mic. Child of 2 teachers, and just mostly wanted to reiterate the gentleman in the black shirt's passion for wanting to make sure that school administration supports their teachers to the fullest extent. And then from a data standpoint, one thing that hasn't been talked about that I was curious, classroom size, like pupil to like educator ratio, and kind of like where we've been, where we're at now, and kind of like what's optimal, and if that makes even if it makes a difference at all.
Classroom size has stayed consistent. One thing to note, I think, insofar as classroom size that has, I think, value and merit, and Ms. Robinson and her colleagues have made clear, in about 3/4 of our classes, we'll have a co-teacher who the teacher can collaborate with to plan those small groups and to try to stretch and meet the needs of each of those children. So that has been, I think, a benefit to some of these courses. I don't know, Ms. Robinson, would you add anything to that idea?
So I teach 5 classes, and 4 out of the 5 this year just happen to be co-taught. And I have to say that having that extra teacher in there who obviously knows math. She's an intervention specialist that specializes in the math and this is our 4th year working together, it is a game changer. I will say that. Having her in the room, we can do 2 small group instruction stations simultaneously while we have another group working on something else that we can check in with. Having that extra teacher in the room is a game changer. There's no other way around it. I do have to say, my one class that's non-co-taught, where it's just me and 23 students, it's a lot more work. There's one of me and a lot of them. So yes, it does benefit having an extra adult in the room when we do have, 20 to 25 students in a class.
That's actually a good example, I think, of something that has evolved over time. When we talked to teachers last year, one of the things we heard was exactly that. Having multiple adults in the classroom is beneficial. So we've been very intentional about trying to continue to add and increase the number of classrooms where we're pushing supports and extra adults into the classroom.
And actually, that's where a partnership with Dr. Yurick has been so essential. When we don't have a co-taught class, or there may not be a need for an intervention specialist, we've actually partnered with CSU to the full extent of our ability, have another adult in that room who knows the content to partner with the teacher and meet the needs of the children.
Bala Ramachandran. I have 2 kids in the school district. One is in college and the other one is in middle school. First of all, thanks a lot for having this forum. This is an awesome objective. I think many of us would support it wholeheartedly. I think the devil would be in the details. That's where the concerns would come from, right? I think many of you spoke about, Dr. Amanda, Dr. Moore, etc., spoke about this not only helps the student at the 20th percentile, it also helps the student at the 95th percentile, right? I think some of our students, Belly spoke about some students expressing a reservation. It's, this is too boring, it's like a cakewalk, etc. So my first question is, what specific, I think you used the word intervention. Intervention is not just for the disabled, it's also for the skilled people, right? So what specific interventions are we planning so that it's not a cakewalk and everyone gets challenged, right? The 5th percentile as well as the 95th percentile. The second question is, what does this mean at a high school level? Today, or 5 years back when my daughter passed, we had an honors, a core, and an AP. Are we going to continue to have those 3 levels, or if you can talk to that, that'll be great.
I would invite any of my panelists to share in this. One thing that you made me think of, and it connects with this idea of community feedback. I was hearing from parents last year, they said, your teachers are making great gains in developing these differentiated tasks for high-achieving learners. And when you give that as an option to a 13-year-old, they don't always choose to do that tough task. That was good feedback for me because I knew on the back end, I had participated with our teachers to develop a range of tasks so that they could stretch some of these accelerated learners. That was an aha for me, in that shifting our expectations from an invitation or an option for children to stretch to a truly differentiated setting where, based on data, we say, we have these 3 levels, and maybe there is a right time for choice. I don't want to rob our autonomy in that way. But we have these 3 levels of students. We have these 3 levels of tasks. This is your goal for the day. Sometimes, and oftentimes, it's appropriate to say you choose, where you are today. And I think to meet the need of some of those accelerated learners and those high-achieving learners, it can't always be an opt-in for the challenge. It has to be an expectation. And I think that that's something that we still need to continue to work on. So I know we have the curriculum. I know our teachers are doing that. We have to look at how we now build a culture from invitation to expectation to stretch all of those learners. That's what you made me think about. And that came from parent feedback. And it demonstrates why occasions like this are so important.
Go ahead, Ms. Roman.
I will speak to, last year it was an option. They could choose the level. We would highly suggest what we thought that they should work on, but it was an option, and we did realize that some of our students weren't taking the more challenging material, even though they were prepared for it. So this year, it's more of an expectation of these are the levels that you are going to be doing. There is a time for, voice and choice, but right now this is the expectation. Hopefully that they'll continue to see like, oh, I can do this, and then they'll eventually choose it on their own when given the opportunity.
Just to touch on high school for a minute, our high school course pathways continue to exist. I know Dr. Moore mentioned this earlier. You probably heard a little bit from our students. Our goal is to ensure that more students are taking advantage of the course pathways that we offer, like advanced placement, like IB diploma program, like College Credit Plus, which I know Belize is in, like career technical education, so that really they can choose what pathway, they're prepared to choose whatever pathway they want to pursue instead of us choosing for them.
Thanks to all of you for sticking with us. My name is David Donadio. I'm a parent of students at Fernway and Woodbury, and I used to live in your old neck of the woods in Montgomery County. Question for Dr. Yurick, but I'd welcome anybody else on the panel answering as well. I was pleased to hear you refer at least 3 times to evidence-based educational practices. Anecdotes of ACT scores notwithstanding, what evidence do you have of the impact of detracking on college attainment, employment at 10 years after graduation, and rates of incarceration? And Dr. Campbell, you have 15 years of experience in this in your district, so I presume you might have more personal knowledge of that as well. Can any of you cite one longitudinal study that shows positive outcomes in detract districts by any of those measures? Thank you.
That's a terrific question. I'm going to pop in here really quickly and put my researcher hat on. So when we look at what's the evidence of the outcome improvement, I want to be sure that when we talk about detracking is not the independent variable here. Detracking is the conduit. So the independent variable.
What I'm looking for here is for you to cite the name of a study that I could read, the names of the researchers, for example, so that I could look it up and read it in a journal.
So studies that are looking at detracking as the independent variable for the dependent variable of decreased incarceration rates. Is that
you have to give me something that I can look up.
No, I'm not aware of detracking as an independent variable looking at graduation outcomes, if that's the simplistic question. But
So that's how you'd answer the question at a cocktail party, for example.
Because it's not the independent variable, it's simply the procedural tactic.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, so from a research perspective, it's not that the evidence doesn't exist because it hasn't been found, it's because that's not the level of analysis of the question that is asked from a researcher perspective.
Okay, well, I'm not going to belabor this with additional rounds.
So the evidence and improved outcome is to provide the evidence-based practice for students in all levels of the class. Right? So if you are not providing the evidence-based instruction, you will not see the improved outcome. The conduit of detracking is simply the arrangement we take to implement those practices. So the arrangement is not the independent variable making that causal outcome. It's the actual instruction happening.
Dr. Campbell, Dr. Moore, you want to add anything here?
I think Dr. Bavis spoke to our performance indicators, and our, it came up in our board meeting a few years ago, how far do we evaluate this persistence? And almost every researcher that, came to our board table and had a conversation with us in the district said, it's, once you get a little past that, what is that, 11th semester, or whatever the semester was, Pete, what's the number? It was literally first semester freshman year, right? And they wanted more than that. The variables change, and you can't really attribute what was happening in college to high school after that point, because so many things happen in a kid's life where even if they didn't stay in college, it could have been financial, it wasn't a good fit. There were so many other variables that were happening in kids' lives, but with the indicators that we did have as far as what we were looking at internally and externally, we knew that that the outcomes that we were getting as a result of the intervention, which is to put everybody together, was actually better looked at, provided a better achievement for all of our kids, including our white kids.
It's the difference between a longitudinal study and an experimental study, in short. So experimental studies ask X causes Y. Longitudinal studies look at the longer-term outcomes, like Dr. Campbell was mentioning.
I would say a connective tissue for me, however, on this very important idea of what's the long-term impact of what we're after here. I think what we do know, and I'd have to look at the research to determine the extent of causality, and what it appears to be is that there's a correlation between young people, particularly marginalized youth, having access, engagement, and success in challenging, rigorous high school programs like advanced placement, IB, et cetera. There is a lot of research in the field that says when we provide those opportunities for young people, they tend to thrive in college and beyond. And there's a body of research that indicates when you do detracking in this intentional way as we are trying to do, you open up access to those upper level courses for your marginalized youth. So the point that I'm trying to make is there's a robust body of knowledge out there that says when you provide these opportunities for all students, marginalized in particular, they do well after high school. And how do you give access? How do you provide? How do you create access? For that, you do things like systematic detracking or systemic detracking. So that's sort of the theory of action that we're working under to make these outcomes happen for our kids.
Only other thing I would add, there is a body of research that talks about heterogeneous classrooms and what impact that has on academic outcomes. Generally shows positive outcomes or more positive outcomes for students, and at least as good outcomes for students at that most advanced level. I don't have my lit review from my dissertation memorized.
That is something we
Carol
can share.
Burris is one name that comes to mind as somebody who's kind of a big name in the field.
And the ones that didn't, it wasn't the detracking, it was the implementation.
Right.
It was the challenges with implementation that made it not work, not the actual detracking itself.
Right. Yeah. But we can certainly try to get some of those research studies put on our website for folks to review.
Thank you for taking our questions. Really appreciate it. Patrick Azori again. In detracking, how would high school students approaching the college admissions process distinguish their academic record, both from a grade point average and list of courses? And does that then make enrollment in AP courses even more important?
No, go ahead.
You take the first part.
No, I was just going to say, we went to an earned honors model, so you look at a student's transcript, it's going to say it's going to have that honors designation on the transcript, it's going to have AP on the transcript, and all of that. So we did have a lot of conversations with admissions folks to say, will this hurt our students? And we were sort of explaining what we were doing, and the answer was no. And but if you look at our transcript, it looks like, any other transcript that what would it would ordinarily look like. And so it didn't seem as if like, oh, we've got these kids from Evanston Township High School and they have these courses and there's no designation next to them. That's that didn't happen. And one of the things we did do on our journey was we got rid of class rank. And maybe Dr. Bavis could talk a little bit about that. But we did not get rid of the honors and AP GPA weights that we were used to having, because we found out that would hurt our post-secondary plans for kids. And so we kept that around because the admissions folks were saying because we were going to get rid of class rank and, get rid of the bump, which is what we called it. But if we got rid of the bump, we were told that would definitely hurt the kids.
I want to jump in quickly, though, not to cut you off, and say the same question about equity and admissions and access curriculum is happening at the university level as well across the board. So in terms of looking at SAT scores alone, or did you take AP classes alone, that's going by the wayside, and I see that moving forward in higher education. So not to say nobody uses that, of course people do, but the conversation around how are we evaluating their preparation is far more than those scores alone.
So, Dr. Campbell, you mentioned honors. So in a detract environment, honors still exists?
So we have an environment where kids take the same class, but they can earn honors credit, right? So we went from a system that was, we had 1 level, 2 mix, and honors, right? And so now it's just it's just class earning honors credit, and then you can move up and do AP.
Thank you very much.
And this may be a place where we differ a little bit, since you guys are just a high school district. When we talk about honors, all students now taking algebra, that's really talking about middle school, which obviously I know you work with middle schools, but that doesn't, you're not a middle school inclusive district. At our high school, and Dr. Moore, you can talk a little more about this, we continue to have AP classes, we continue to have diploma program classes, and other course levels, even though we've consolidated some of them. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
I would do my very best to channel my dear friend and high school department chair for counseling, Shauna Bonner, who has instructed me or informed me, one, oftentimes colleges unweight whatever we send them. They unweight them, they have a calculation so that they can compare young people across schools. Our school weighting system is different from Cleveland Heights, is different from Beechwood. They know that, and they have a process to work through that. But what is important, as I understand it, is they look at what you offered as a high school. What does Shaker Heights do as a high school? What could you have taken as a high schooler in that district, and what did you take? And the reason why that's important is because we offer, and we're privileged in this way, we offer more AP, IB, CCP than by and large anybody else you'll find. Well, think about what that feels like for a young person who might be attending downtown Cleveland Metropolitan School District 15 minutes from here. Simply because they didn't have those options, does that mean that they should be excluded from college admissions? The answer is no. And so what colleges, as I understand it, will do is they'll say, well, what could you have taken as high school? And at Shaker, that's just about everything. And what did you take? And that's factoring into that conversation. The only other thing I would say about that, you heard Dr. Bavis talk about the importance of external validation for some of this. We offer a lot of AP classes, IB classes, College Credit Plus classes, Career Tech Ed, but we don't necessarily provide the final score for those. It's College Board, it's the IB, and what that means is it's our role to prepare these young people and prepare them well, and it's College Board who's assessing them. And why that matters is because it's in their hands, really as a reflection of what that young person did, what we did to prepare them. That's going to be a factor in that college opportunity as well.
I also just want to take a minute to recognize Mr. Julie, our high school principal. So for folks who have more questions about high school courses, I'm not volunteering you this evening.
But not tonight.
At some point,
all right.
You're also you're welcome, Mr. Julie. Good.
Hey, I'm Mark Ackerman. I'm a Shaker grad. My kids started their academic career in Denver Public Schools. And we were told, once they were identified as gifted and talented, that they needed to go to a different school. They needed to go to a school where they were getting a gifted education, and they would be around other gifted kids. And so that echoed my experience here at Shaker in the 90s when I went to Ludlow, and when we had that, when we had programs like that. So my questions are I'd like you to address the change over time. And they say they're right, and we say this program is right. So that's one thing. But then second, what was the rationale for the district to get a waiver from the state to not provide elementary gifted services? That's what we're hearing from the gifted specialists now, was that there was a waiver, that we didn't have to provide the services. And then now we're being told we are compliant and we are providing gifted services. So what's the shift, and why was that made?
I'll talk about the more recent shift, perhaps.
And then maybe Dr. Yurick, you can talk a little bit about the historical.
That would be great. It is true. In the state of Ohio, you must identify gifted learners. You do not have to serve gifted learners. Starting 2 years ago, however, we made the choice to begin servicing these young people in a different way. We talked a little bit earlier about gifted intervention specialists and how they function at one, training teachers, and two, pushing to the classroom and providing some supports or interventions in these small cluster groups. That's our service model, is cluster groups, rather than the pull-out, which you may be thinking of. The decision around that, I think, was really to meet the needs of all children, to recognize that there are exceptional youth who are working beyond perhaps their peers. How do we serve them in a way that they have positive peer-to-peer interactions, and we're designing instruction to meet their needs and to continue to stretch and push them? I will say what we're not doing is pulling out children. I do believe that would undermine a lot of the work that you heard us talk about today.
But that's happening now. So there's a math class, there's a specialized math class for sixth graders. That's like, they're still at Woodbury, but they're taking seventh grade math. So, like, it's kind of like we're talking about two different
You're talking about our acceleration. So gifted services and acceleration, under the same umbrella in some ways, but different. Subject areas acceleration is when a young person has demonstrated such a high percentile. When a team gets together, including the parents, the child, our gifted intervention specialist, the principal, we'll look at the degree to which that young person would succeed in a grade level above. That class you're talking about, Woodbury, for example, is a 7th grade math class on our Woodbury campus. Typically, when those same young people in 5th grade, when they're in 6th grade, they get put in a 6th grade Woodbury class. It is true, when 6th graders are accelerating in 7th grade, we have a choice to make. We can either serve them on campus, or we could bus them to the middle school. At least for this year, and sometimes it depends on numbers, we decided to serve them at Woodbury because there was such a number, and our concern around transporting them to the middle school would eat away their schedule at Woodbury. They'd be missing other important elements of their education. I think that is the point.
How's that not creating a detract group then? If you're pulling out a group of like 15 6th graders and giving them a specialized class, how's that not detracting? I mean, how is that not tracking those students?
When they're accelerated, they are put into that heterogeneous class. And the class that you're talking about at Woodbury, we did make the choice this year to serve them at Woodbury. Had we serviced them at middle school, which we would do in 5-6 or 7-8 or 9 and up, they would be placed in a heterogeneous class like Ms. Robinson's with the other 7th graders who would be getting cluster models but wouldn't be being pulled out.
So for 5th graders who are accelerated, they're going into a heterogeneous 6th grade class.
6th grade, detract.
For 7th graders who are accelerated, they're going into heterogeneous class. It's that 6th grade class because the schools aren't near each other that we have had quite a few conversations about that for the reason you're asking the question. For this year, we felt like given the constraints we faced, that was something that we need to do this year. That may be something we'll revisit in the future.
So why the shift then from why did we have the beginning of my kid's career that they were not being offered any gifted services? It feels really bad as a parent to have your kid being identified as gifted and then to be told, the state makes us test, but we don't have to provide services. Like, why did that ever happen in a district like Shaker?
Yeah, that's something that predated a lot of us. I think the answer that I often heard was because we're an IB district, our expectation is that all students have access to that more enriched curriculum. Now, I know that answer might fall short, and that's why we wanted to make sure that we were providing some additional supports, and we've moved in the direction of having gifted intervention specialists, but often the answer I heard was really related to being an IB district.
Well, and it is true to this day, our IB coordinators at elementary, they still push in for enrichment, and we recognize with the advent of gifted coordinator and intervention specialists, there was always more we could be doing to frankly address, I think, the concern that you're expressing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for being so patient for these last few folks.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Solzer, an alumna, and I have 3 kids in the Mercer area. And my question relates to in what ways do you motivate all the kids in this classroom, this mixed classroom? Kids at the top previously would have been with other kids at the top, and naturally people compare to what other people are doing especially when you're in the same class and you see what else is going on. And on the other side, kids that are on the lower end, if they're getting lower grades than they may have like in a previous where they're in a lower level class, even if they're improving in their skills, that's still not very motivating.
Okay, I can jump in. So last year I was in the honors U.S. history course, and for the kids that were coming out of the lower level track, the teacher just made sure to provide extra support and extra time on certain areas where he think they might struggle. And also, there's a very open line of communication between student and teacher to make sure that they are progressing as they should be and that they are getting all the help they need. And like I said before, there's a lot of resources at the high school. Obviously, there needs to be more student engagement in those resources. Like we have the ARC, where you can receive free tutoring. But like I said before, it's more just about buy-in and the kids utilizing the resources that we do have here?
Yeah, it's also about, especially also what Belize said, like what I think you said is like Raider time, but we've got like conferences at the high school. It's a very big like go there, and if you need that extra support, that is a place and a time that you can get that one-on-one help. But not only that, you can get peer feedback too. So like small groups might work like in conferences, be like, oh, well, I have number 2. Well, how'd you do that one? And that ends up helping the kids who might have understood it. Then they can explain that answer to the kids that didn't, and then the other kid that didn't understand, like then got that in turn and got the question right. So I mean, I really think like these they help each other, and it's I think having de-leveling these classes, detracking the classes, and having everyone be together. I think you have the kids who, I said this earlier, I'll have the kids who are higher level, and I think they help and they feed into that, and they help the kids that are struggling, and I think it brings everybody along, and I think that is a lot of like moral stamina and things like that, and I think a lot of mental, some kids, like if the morale's low in the class, and I mean you can't really do a lot off of that, but I think that is a big point, and everyone kind of just like brings in and ties everyone together.
I do think that a lot of like motivating a student comes from like the lesson, how engaging it is, the relationship that the teacher has with the student, and the expectations that you have. You know, we open up a lesson with like a low floor, high ceiling question, where students can feel successful at any ability level. They can answer the question. They might arrive at the answer differently, but it's still the same answer. But I definitely think students, when they feel like they have that relationship with their teacher, and their teacher is their, main cheerleader, rooting them on to do their best, they're motivated there, along with like small group conferencing, constant check-ins with their teachers. I feel like that really helps motivate them to want to do well and to see that they can do well.
Thank you. All right, you get the honor. Last question.
Hello, everyone. Rob Gray, class of '97. Ooh. I was sitting here thinking about what the young lady Belize said about buy-in. Okay. At this district, when I was a cop coming up, the creed of academic excellence pervaded the whole thing. And it's not to say it doesn't today, but it was instilled in, 4, 5, 6, okay? 7, 8. And it was, I feel like, and I've substituted in this district, a lot of people know me around here, obviously grew up here. I feel like there's been some fall off of that. I think that we have to invest in the creed of excellence at a young age. Okay, so now the IB protocol, we have a certain set of values, 8, 10, 12 values. And what I've seen firsthand is that the kids they're not latching onto that. So we've invested in this over the last 15 years or so, this IB protocol. But are we really seeing those values cultivated in these youth? All of that speaks to their work ethic when it comes to study habits. That's what I'm getting at with that. When you have that creed and it's developed in you, then you become a person who's like, I want to achieve academically on the same level as my peers. I'm speaking specifically about African American kids more so, although it encompasses all of us. I think that we're speaking slightly aloof here in the academic and technical aspect of things, but not down to the actual front lines of this. So, and teachers will tell you this firsthand, that the level of learning, the level of outcomes that you get has a lot to do with what's up here for the youth, the young person, okay? Second thing quickly is what is being planned, or what contingencies do you have to mitigate attrition? Because as we go through different iterations and we develop institutional knowledge of how to get this right, how do we continue to preserve it over time? When we talk about a long view, 10 years, 20 years out, it would be a tragedy to get this right and then, due to unforeseen circumstances, you start to see another, it could be another pandemic, you never know. But it's something that has to be game planned now, because we can't put all this in, get it right, and then not, you have administrators and teachers that retire, that have all the institutional knowledge without handing it off and succession planning.
Thank you. That's actually something we did talk about earlier today. Dr. Campbell, can you talk a little bit about your experience doing this kind of over the long haul and how you made this sustainable?
Yes, we made it sustainable by hiring for the sustainability, where when you come to our district, you know that these are our values and know that it is how we teach, how we do school, and it won't be a shock to know that, oh, you all don't track here? Well, no, this is, the groupings of the kids that we have, and we have had many retirements. I think we've had quite a few, and our teacher retention rate is over 95%. But as folks retire, we are sure that we hire for not just where we are, but for where we intend to go.
And I know this is also a really important piece, all that professional learning support you heard about, that job embedded support. We have additional professional, our DEI department has a new director of professional learning. All of those things are put in place to help create that sustainability over time. I believe you're Belize's brother, so you get, go for it.
Yeah, sorry for coming up so late. I couldn't stand in that line. But one thing I wanted to touch on is when I went here over 10 years ago, being one of two African-American students in AP class, I remember feeling alone because nobody else in that class looked like me. There was really no connection with the other students. So I kind of felt like I was doing everything on my own. I didn't really have that support group. Where in my honors classes, we had like group messages where we were doing homework together, projects together, things like that. We even had kids come over to the house and we would do things together. So I do see the benefit in having, not just closing the gap educationally, but socially. I think that if everybody's on the same track, then that may, encourage other students to connect with students who share the same curriculum. But one of the questions I did have is, I know you have data research on how this could work, but for the students who, let's say they are going to the conferences, they're trying to get the extra help that they need. What about that group of students who aren't just they don't meet the expectation, they don't meet the standard, and they're just not getting it? Where do those students fall in the, in this whole process? And my second question is, sorry, if honors and AP is the same curriculum at the same pace, what is the difference? Like, does the AP students only take the AP test? Or like, what is the difference? What separates the honor students and the AP students if it's the same curriculum and the same pace?
Well, let me just say that when we decided to take all of these levels off, we pay particular attention to our most vulnerable students, right? When you talk about equity, we were sure that we were going to give some of our best teachers, sometimes in some districts, the best teachers go to who they believe the best students are. Well, we gave some of our best, most skilled, highly trained teachers to our most vulnerable kids. And actually, they wanted those kids. And it's been a focus for our work as we have designed, redesigned, and just have really come to a sweet spot in our implementation so many years later. And about AP and honors, they're not at the same pace, right? What we do in our earned honors program is we've backwards designed our honors curriculum to prepare the kids for the AP curriculum, but that AP curriculum is still the AP curriculum. And what we just did was we brought up all of our kids to be able to, I don't want to say compete, but at least be successful in those spaces. But AP and honors are not at the same pace, not at all.
Yeah, and that would be true for Shaker too. Go for it.
Good evening, I'm Star, I'm Belize's mom. And I just have one statement, because I haven't heard anyone touch upon this. And I know this is a pie and there's a lot of pieces to it, but what I would like to see is some resources for parents, because I haven't heard anybody say anything about educating or having a structure environment for parents to get the resources. If I'm not mistaken, Ms. Robinson is the teacher that suggested Belize for Rising Stars with Mrs. Webb many years ago. And for a young child to buy in, to go to school all day, go to an after-school program, Rising Stars, and then come home and do not 1 hour extra work, but possibly 2 hours, that's very, you know, it wasn't always nice at the dinner room table at my house. But, you know, thank God it worked out, you know, so far so good. But I would like to have the statement as far as just having something for parents once we get this pie a little bit more, you know, in order for parents to come and see in 3rd grade, 4th grade, to have the children buy in. If they buy in at a young age, then it's not such a struggle by the time they get to middle school, or, you know, if they're there at elementary, when they get to Woodbury, they know that, okay, we all look alike, because we're all learning, we're all having the same conversations. So just please have some more resources for parents to buy into this, so that, because this should not all fall on the district, it should not all fall on the teachers. They have a heavy load already. Some responsibility for the education for the children most of it lies with the parents. And I would like for something to be in place for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you very much for that suggestion. All right, panelists, in 1 sentence or less, you get last word here. What is something that you want to leave everyone here with? We're going to start with Ms. Robinson. I know if I was good instructional strategy is to give everybody wait time. There's your wait time. Why don't we go down? And if you need to pass, you can pass, but we're going to come back to you.
Okay.
So go for it.
I would say please have an open mind, because I'm currently living in it, teaching in it, and I do truly believe that detracking is working and we are on the right track.
Yeah, I would also say, as someone who's living in it currently, I just think it's always a work in progress, and not taking it as like one day you flip a switch and it's like perfect. I mean, there's always kinks in everything, and I think that's a big part of what like today is. It's just a big work in progress, and I think we've got a lot of progress and a lot more to go.
Like Maddie said, we're both experiencing it. We've both experienced both sides, tracking, detracking, and I would just say that at the very least, detracking will allow students to be in a space where they can hear different perspectives and hear different stories from people's culture. And at the very least, Shaker will be outputting and breeding students who have empathy and will at least survive in the world. You know, it's a rough place out there.
Couple of thoughts. One, I think we have a ways to go on earning trust that we are making good decisions that are not just ethical but are academic for all the young people in this district. My second thought is Evanston might have gotten there first, but we're going to be best.
My thoughts are this, that if you believe they can, they will. That's pretty much all I have to say.
I'm going to use my last comment to address your concern, and that is these resources do exist for a community of educators. It's not up to the teachers, it's not up to the administrators, it's not up to university faculty, but that community exists, and at Cleveland State we are advancing those efforts, so talk to me later because it's out there.
Can we give our panelists a huge round of applause? I want to thank everybody for staying here this evening. If this is something that you're excited about and interested in learning more about, we have 2 more events coming up, October 23rd, November 1st. Those are immersive classroom experiences, math on the 23rd, language and literature on November 1st. More information on our website and in your program. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening. And I think we have some goodie bags for our panel.